Welcome to the Lux Files, a podcast for occultists about occultists. I'm your host, Sean, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Be sure to subscribe to the Lux Files wherever you get your podcasts to stay up to date on all the new episodes. Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 21 of the Lux Files. I am with weird lecturer, author, and just all-around weirdo, Mr. John Tenney. Hello, hello, hello.
Hello, hello, hello.
How are you?
I am doing well. It's a little hot here, but that's fine. I don't do well with heat. I'm a fall winter person. I love snow and icy winds.
Oh, I hate snow. I like fall. I really like fall. I'm not a winter person. Being from Canada, you would think that I'm adapted to winter and snow, but I'm not. I used to live in Texas, and I much prefer the climate down there. I like the heat a lot.
I am born and raised just outside of Detroit, so I am used to heavy winters and lake effect snow, and my heart is a little cold piece of black ice, and so it fits in perfectly with that climate.
Not true. Not true. That is absolutely not true. Your heart is not a black piece of ice, because you completely saved me today. So I appreciate it. So there's a little spark in there somewhere. Maybe not enough to light your cigarettes, but there's a little spark in there somewhere.
Indeed.
I love Detroit. I love Detroit so much. My father used to be a truck driver, and when I was in grade school, during summer vacation, I would travel with him. And Toronto technically was the first like really big city I'd ever been to, but usually like we never were like downtown in the city. And so going to Detroit for the first time, I was completely enchanted, because like we drove through the city and downtown, and everything was just so amazing to me, and I loved it. And I mean, I was really young, and this was the 80s, so RoboCop, of course, was set in Detroit, and I loved RoboCop. And for some reason, I thought that Gotham City from the Batman movies, the Michael Keaton Batman movies, for some reason, I was a kid. I thought that Gotham City was Detroit.
Yeah, for sure.
And so I just was completely enamored with Detroit, and all of our American television networks came through Detroit. They come through Minneapolis now because it's closer. It makes more sense. But back then it came through Detroit, and we would never watch our local 11 o'clock news as a kid. We always watched the Detroit news. So Detroit always kind of felt like another sort of like hometown to me.
Yeah. I'm a comic book kid, and so I grew up always imagining that, New York was Metropolis, Gotham was Detroit. But, Detroit in the 80s and 90s was not great to live in. Yeah. It was a pretty dangerous place. Yeah. I mean, I grew up just in the outskirts. So I grew up 11 miles outside of Detroit, north of Detroit. And as I got older, I said, like, oh, I'm going to live in downtown proper. As soon as I move out, I'm going to live in downtown proper. I want to live in the city. And when I moved to Detroit, I was there for 6 months. I got shot, and I moved back to the suburbs. And I was like, that's it. Like, I had my Detroit experience.
Yeah, there you go. That's the full Detroit experience, really. Well, again, and that's what's the beauty, like, two of my jobs, I would have to travel to New York, and it's amazing. Like, going to New York is amazing as a tourist, right. Or like someone like me I've always ever been in New York for business. So, I don't pay for a thing. That's great. Driving through Detroit as a kid with your father, that's great. living, not necessarily so much. It's great. Some places are great to see in small bits, and then be able to get the hell out of town.
Well, and Detroit is one of those. I always assume that it's different just because of the history that Detroit has had. But in the 80s and 90s, we had a really vibrant music punk rock scene. And that was when I really realized, because with the punk rock scene came along like a lot of like skinheads and racists and Nazis. And so that was like my first kind of wake up that, oh, there are super terrible people in the world.
Right.
I mean, having friends, watching my friends get beat up because they had funny hair coloring. Like, I know that happened a lot in the 80s. It's almost a trope, that if you look weird, you got beat up by the jocks or whatever. But in Detroit and in the punk rock scene, me and my friends were getting demolished because one of us was dating someone who wasn't white.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty, I mean, it's disgusting. It really is.
But I think, for me, it was a very, these experiences that happen, which are so terrible in the moment and remain terrible and can revisit trauma upon my memory, are transformative, because without those experiences, you can even learn to empathize with some enemies and realize where their pain is coming from.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, me growing up like as an out gay teenager in my, well, I say small town because I'm so used to living in, cities population 5 million or whatever, but my hometown being 100,000 people, that's still, that's small enough. Back then, you're not sympathizing with your attackers or your abusers, but now you can look back and see their issues, and how many of them are still closeted homos, to this day, 25 years later or whatever. Yeah. So yeah,
and there's also that perspective too. Like, I recently was cleaning out my house, and I found a couple of old yearbooks, and I looked at the pictures of the guys who used to kind of mercilessly beat me up, and I look at them, and like, I know that I was that age too when they were beating me up, but I look at them now and I'm like, oh, these were babies. Like, look at these guys. They're struggling to grow a mustache. Like, they're babies. And I was so afeared of these people. Yeah, and I look back now, and they're just the scrawniest little boys in the whole world.
Yeah. It's funny, again, looking back on it, from a perspective of a couple of decades, in that regards, it is kind of funny, but yeah, it is what it is. It is what it is.
And then, in a very kind of karmatic sense too, I was talking to a friend of mine about this experience a few years ago. I was at my local bar that I've gone to since before I was drinking age to go there. It was the type of bar where you could just go in when you were 16 and 17.
Yeah.
But I was at that bar a few years ago, and one of these dire high school bully, horrible people was there with his wife and approached me, and he was super drunk, and he came up and, oh, John, it's so good to see you. And he introduced me to his wife. This is John. This guy was so cool in high school. I love this guy. We were good friends. And I was just like standing there remembering him punching me in the face and kicking me in the stomach. And I looked at his wife and I was like, he hated me. He used to beat me up all the time. And he was like, oh, no, it's just a joke. And I was like, no, it wasn't a joke. Like, we're not friends. We never have been friends. And I watched that kind of youthful anger return back to his eyes in his drunkenness. And he grabbed his wife and turned around. And I was like, oh, he's still a little boy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I lived back in my hometown, Thunder Bay, where I grew up, and one thing I realized running into people from high school is I mean, you just got to face the facts. I'm prettier, I'm thinner, I'm more fun. I'm just a better person. And yeah, so I get it. I would have punched me in the face too, you know. So there you go. I mean, I probably still punch myself in the face too if I had to deal with myself now anyway. So
I will tell you, I went to I think it was either 20 or 25-year anniversary, and I made sure I went late. I went when I knew there was only 30 minutes left. It was in the downtown area of my hometown, and I didn't want to go, but I wanted to see everybody.
mm,
And so I went the last 30 minutes. I knew everybody would be drunk, and I kind of wandered around, and everybody had gone back to their clique groups. All of the cheerleaders were in one group. All of the burnout kids were outside smoking. All of the jocks were talking their former glories. And I was just kind of standing there, and wasn't just my high school's reunion. There were like other classes there. So, and this gentleman came up to me and he goes, John Tenney. And I said, yeah, who are you? And he goes, my name's Chris. He goes, you would have never known me. I was 2 years beneath you in school. And I went, oh, okay. And we kind of stood there for a moment. And he went, you wouldn't have known who I was, but I saw you being who you were, and I saw how they treated you, and you never gave up. And that really inspired me. And I just wanted to tell you that. And he tinked my glass that I was holding, and he was like, see you later. And he walked away, and I thought, oh, so when you don't think you're making a difference, you're making a difference.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That's amazing. That's really cool.
It was really amazing.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I I don't know. I mean, you know, I have my story about, you know, my childhood and my fascination with ancient Egypt and the Egyptian gods, and you know, and then growing up, getting into D&D and discovering witchcraft and blah 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 blah. So there's that whole, you know, kind of like logical, tangible story of why I am, you know, the way I am now. I don't know. There's got to be a more fundamental, like deeper in your core reason why you're weird, and you're just weird as an adult. There has to be, like, I don't think, you know, discovering, you know, the amazing wonders of ancient Egypt makes you weird and magical. Like you're born with it. And it's like, you know, I was joking earlier about running to people from high school now and realizing just how amazing I am compared to them. But I'm different. I'm weird. I'm not, you know, quote unquote normal. And they're just so normal and boring and cookie cutter. And I'm so thankful. If it took being, you know, like harassed for being gay as a teenager all through high school, if that was the small price to pay to live this amazing life, then it's totally worth it. You know,
Yeah.
because I look at people like that and just how, you know, normal and boring and empty their lives are. And like, I would never want that, you know?
Yeah, and I mean that's one of the on my path to living a weird magical life. I think a lot of who I became and who I am and who I'm turning into on this journey has to do with the fact that the creative part of me adapts and can learn from other people's experiences. Where some people have to actually go to a mountain, I can look at people who have been to mountains and discern something from that. I think that's something that, I mean, I think there are different types of people, and some people do have to go to the mountain to learn the lesson. I think there are other people who can talk to the people who have been to the mountain and learn the lesson. But at the same time, very early on, I realized, especially when I started meeting people who were doing witchcraft and magic, that I would have drunken 14-year-old friends say to me, you got to figure out who you are. And then decades later, these initiated high elders would tell me, know thyself. And I realized, like, this 14-year-old drunk kid had it like years before this guy did. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? I don't know if that makes a lot of sense, but
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things that you see with magical people is that they can see the poetry in every day, where other people, like you're saying, just see every day and don't realize that it's poetry.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You were a weird kid growing up. Like you have
Yes.
to have been a weird kid growing
Yeah,
up. You got to
for
have
sure.
some, yeah, you got to have some pretty interesting stories, even like grade school age.
Yeah, so when I think about my normal life as a child, I don't think I ever really broke away from the childish things you're told to put away as you get older.
Mhm.
There are an uncountable amount of pictures of me um, hugging trees and uh, laying on. We used to go up into northern Michigan on our family vacations, talking to horses and cows and making friends with animals and running arms spread through wheat fields and loving nature. And I think that is, children kind of naturally magical. And I think as they get older, their parents and their surrounding environment kind of pushes it down. And I didn't have an environment that pushed me away from that.
Mhm.
When I wanted to do something weird or I wanted to go outside, if I wanted it to rain, my mom knew I was going to go outside and I was going to take a bunch of wet towels and beat rocks until it rained. Like that was just something that I thought worked and it seemed to work. And I still do a version of that in today. Like I still do versions of that type of rain magic.
Yeah.
But I read comic books and was obsessed with were there gods in outer space and how human beings could manipulate reality. And I played Dungeons and Dragons early on too, and casting wizard spells. And the thing that was most intriguing to me about Star Wars was the Force and watching people manipulate reality with their minds. And like it's it's strange how none of that stuff seemed strange to me. And then
Right.
as I got older, it seemed even more normal to me and even more strange to people who thought it was strange to begin with.
It's weird though when you think about it because there's all this magic in the world growing up as a kid in comic books and movies and shows and whatnot. And to 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 realize that, I didn't think it was weird or strange as a kid and as an adult to know it's not weird or strange or make believe is just it's such a fascinating process um that sometimes I feel like if everyone has to roll the dice when they're being born to see what they get, like I got snake eyes, like I was lucky. I think I was damn lucky.
Yeah. I mean, I feel that way too because I grew up without any religion whatsoever. My parents did not force me to go to church. When I realized that my best friend, I think I was in like second or third grade when I realized my best friend Corey didn't go to my school, my elementary school. He went to St. Dennis and a Catholic school. And so I asked my mom, like, why does Corey go to a different school? And she was like, oh, they believe in God and the Bible. And I was like, what's that? And she's like, oh, there's a Bible in the living room. You can go and look through it and read it if you want to. That's what they believe. And that was like my introduction to religion. But I had already been reading comic books by that time. So it just seemed like another weird, fantastical story to me.
Right? Yeah. 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 I tried reading the Bible when I was a kid. Well, I don't mean tried. I mean, I didn't grasp it the way, you're meant to grasp it, but it was just another fantastic story. I mean, Revelations, come on, like who doesn't love Revelations? It's a
Yeah,
great story. It's an
yeah.
absolute great story. It's a Marvel movie.
I was just about to say it's Avengers Endgame.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Um,
The monster shows up, the team is going to lose, and then they descend from the sky and beat the monsters back and save everybody. I mean,
yeah. Yeah. I mean, and it's funny because you'd be like, oh, well, it's, kind of like inspired by the Bible, but okay, fine, sure. But that whole concept is, so primal and basic in a way, that it certainly goes back farther than the Bible. But so, like, you didn't grow up with any religion, but like your parents weren't religious, but they were like nominally Christian, or or does your family just have like this history of non-religion, like they weren't even baptized or anything like that?
so I'm fairly sure that my mother and father would have been baptized, but like my dad, the only thing my dad ever said about religion was that my grandfather was a Freemason,
Mm,
and he died when my dad was 15, so he didn't know his father very well, but he just remembered the big Masonic funeral for my grandfather,
okay.
and that's the only thing he ever talked about. Like, we have your grandfather's Masonic Bible, and so I just figured like Freemasonry was some other kind of Christianity.
Mm,
And my mother, I don't think ever went to church growing up. They were fairly poor, and my mom would, in kind of true 70s American mom way, she would like tell people that God blesses them, and she would say God loves you. But as I got older, into my teen years, I realized that she wasn't basing that on the Bible. She was a very, very much a kind of golden rule girl. Like, treat everybody with kindness, and that's how we should live our lives. And God is kindness and love, and if everybody treated each other nice, like that's religion.
right, right. And that is, I mean, that is, it's so simple. It gets complicated when you start having these rules, and
Right.
that's
Who can belong and who can't.
yeah, that's when the hate and the intolerance comes in. But if you just, if you base everything on love, and not in a, you know white light and glitter sort of way, but if you just treat everyone with kindness, it's not
Hmm.
hard. Things would be a whole lot better in the world, a whole
Well,
lot better.
one of my mother's things that she impressed upon me, as probably before I was a teenager, I remember having a discussion with her. I was really mad. I don't even remember what I was mad about. We were having a discussion because I had yelled at someone at school. I was probably in sixth grade at the time. And my mom said, so I think the person I'd yelled at, I'm fairly sure it was my friend Joe, who I had been good friends with. And who knows what he did? He probably stole one of my Dungeons and Dragons books or something stupid. But my mother said, when you were yelling at him, did you ever think that you might not ever see him again?
Mm,
And I said, what do you mean? And she goes, well, anybody can die at any time. If you talk to everyone as if this is the last time you're going to talk to them, are you satisfied with how you talked to him for the last time? And like, that really set into me at an early age,
mm,
that if I should treat people like this is going to be the last time, like as soon as they leave my eyesight, I'm never going to see them again.
yeah.
Will I be satisfied with how I treated them? Not how they treated me, but how did I react and act to them?
Yeah. I mean, it's not easy,
No,
not saying that,
no.
it's just, it's an effortless, way of being, but it's certainly a better way of being.
Yeah, and it's obviously it's a path. You have to learn to walk it, and it's hard. And
Yeah.
you are of course going to stumble on any path that you're
Yeah.
on. Shit, my mother yelled at me more than anybody else. She never didn't treat me like that a lot of the times.
Yeah.
Neither did my
Yeah.
father.
Yeah. Yeah.
But to even have that idea in the back of your head, I don't think that there's a lot of people who even care about that.
No.
The only thing that this comes from my dad's side of when my dad would talk to me about what he thought were deep concepts. My dad used to say, the only thing that'll exist after you die is your name. How when your name is spoken, how do you want people to regard your name?
Hmm.
Do you want them to say that you were an asshole and a dick and fucked people over at every chance that he got, or do you want them to like sit back and smile and go, no, he was a good one?
Yeah. 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 It's not easy, but what in life is easy?
Right.
Just because it's not easy doesn't mean it's not something you strive for. And my whole I basically, like, my whole magical practice and my whole spiritual practice is based on, we talk about intent and energy and energy from the universe, universal energy or divine energy, or however you frame it, however you see it, blah blah blah, doesn't matter. To magically do whatever it is you happen to be working on in the moment. I basically, like, instead of talking about that energy as energy or divine energy, whatever, I just think of it as love. Like, I'm using love to do this working, to accomplish this task. And that's basically, like, the whole foundation of my magical practice and my spiritual journey. So, and I was not always like that. Um, I,
So
I,
where yours is love, mine has some love in it, but my energy, my infinite universal, whatever you want to call it, uh, is, for lack of any better word, I mean, it contains love, but is uh, nonsense.
right. Yeah.
Like it's funny gobbledygook nonsense. Everything I do has this edge to it that hopefully someone will see that it's really silly. I think the universe is really silly, and I think that everything in it can be seen as really nonsensical and silly. And I think the way that I internalize the universe is this creative force that is just making all sorts of nonsense and seeing how it will react to itself.
I like that. I like that idea. I don't think I could work sort of in that sort of concept, because my hearing that, my first sort of feeling is a bit of unpredictability. uh I like everything being just so.
Yeah.
So, to me, and I don't mean chaos magic as in, chaos magicians, but I I feel a bit of chaos behind that, and it makes me a little uncomfortable because I'm like, oh, but then, uh the pillows
But
may not be that the throw pillows may not be at a 45-degree angle to the chair, to the back of the chair and the arm rest. That's, oh, I can't, no, I can't, no.
I mean, as a Virgo, I totally understand that.
Yeah.
Like, my life needs to be organized in a certain way. But if you organize and expect the unexpected, and you allow for the nonsense and the chaos, and you say like, okay, there's going to be this much amount of chaos and this much amount of nonsense, then I've put it on a list. So now it's been like categorized and classified, and that satisfies that part of my brain.
Yeah. I mean, I can see a fulfilling sense of freedom in that kind of mentality too, because you're not so bogged down with rules or expectations or everything having to be just so. And there's a certain appeal to that, um, for me personally. And we'll actually get to that because I'm sure at some point we're going to touch on your involvement with Hellier,
Hmm.
which has totally made me reevaluate everything that I believed in, which kind of ties in really well with this conversation. Yeah, so we'll definitely, I'm sure we'll revisit this in a little while because it'll tie in nicely.
When
Um,
when I was first exposed to like ceremonial magic, probably in my late teens and then again in my early 20s, I was, especially in my early 20s, I was really fascinated by the fact that there was so much structure to it that seemed really kind of pleasing to me at the time. But very quickly, I realized that it wasn't for me, that
mhm.
my brain did not do well with a very rigid, structured ritual that has to be performed in a certain way.
Yeah, I
I
love
felt like
it.
it, huh?
I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I understand why it works for people totally.
Mhm.
I just know that, when I used to go, if I look throughout my life at the things that, whether it be music or how I was in school, I used to skip school. I tell this story all the time. I used to skip school in high school so that I could go to the library and read books. And if I look at that as like ritual magic versus what I want to do, like I want to take that path. I just don't want to take that path.
Right.
Like I want to learn, I want to be at school, but I don't want to be at this school. I want to be at the one where I can pick up a book and set it down. And, it was going to, when I used to skip school and go to the library in my hometown is the hometown of Jack Kevorkian.
Mm.
And Jack used to be at the library all the time. And so I became friends with Jack Kevorkian by skipping school. And then he becomes one of those people who set your mind on alternating paths that I probably wouldn't have been having discussions about, end of life philosophy at 16 years old in high school unless I had been skipping school and going to the library.
Yeah. I credit him fully, and I'm thankful for him, as just existing. Because at a very young, I mean, I was really, really young when Jack Kevorkian was the headline news. And thanks to him, he set me on a path really early on, as being a believer in medically assisted dying. And which, for moral reasons, ethical reasons, spiritual reasons, personal reasons, I think is should be a thing. And it's only now, within I think the past year or two, that medically assisted dying has become legal here in Canada. And I'm so proud. It's there's still room for the bill, the law, to be refined, to be more accessible. But I'm proud as a Canadian, that we took that step. And I'm thankful for Dr. Kevorkian, for opening my eyes to that whole world, and setting me on the right course.
Yeah, I mean, Jack was like all people, highly faceted and could be slightly problematic at times with his beliefs, but bringing the idea of assisted suicide and the choice that a person can come to end their suffering that they may be, no return from. The fact that he brought it to the forefront, I thought, was a super important point not just for America, but for the world to have a discussion about.
Mm-hmm.
Because when we talk about things like the legalization of marijuana or LSD or whatever, you're talking about the freedom to loosen your mind. You know, what should you be able to do with your own thoughts? And should that somehow be criminalized? Should you not be allowed to do things that let loose the bondage of your thoughts? And, you know, we still are in a system where you can't, if you are in a cycle or an increasing situation where your quality of life is just becoming less and less quality, you can't even take responsibility for your own life. Like, it's very strange.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know, you know, about the US, and, you know, every state, you know, it can be different, but at one time suicide was a crime. So
It still is.
the only way to avoid being charged with the crime of suicide is by getting it right. But if you got it wrong, then you're under arrest and you're going to trial, and it's just it just makes absolutely no sense. You know, it's ridiculous and it's appalling, and yeah.
Well, and that's the thing too, is because you have to re-examine the structure in totality of not just, you know, when Jack brought it to the forefront, and even still to this day, you have people who will say like, well, if you made assisted suicide legal, you know, teenagers would get depressed and kill themselves. But no, what you have to do is you look at this structure of how we care for each other, which is, you know, assisted suicide becomes a legal mechanism, which means that, strangely enough, there would be hoops that you would have to jump through that would have to be signed off on by a number of people.
Yeah.
And like any medical procedure would have to be performed by, you know, professionals that knew what they were doing.
Yeah.
And that means also that people would have to have access to medical professionals, medical situations, therapists, psychologists, as needed, when needed. Like, and so the whole system needs to be reformed, because that doesn't exist right now. People don't have access, especially in the United States, to the therapy that they need, and the psychologists that they need, and the drugs that they need, and the medical assistance that they need.
Yeah, I mean, you know, with us having universal health care, our access to medical care and mental health and whatnot is different than in the States. But I get your point. But it's funny, it's like, so I'm sorry, are you suggesting that depressed teenagers aren't committing suicide? You know, it's just like when right before we legalized marijuana, you know, all the anti-legalization people, oh, teenagers are going to start smoking pot. I'm sorry, start? I'm sorry, what? I think I started smoking pot before I started drinking. Oh no, that can't be right. No, that's definitely not right. No. Well, no, it's definitely not right. But I started smoking pot. I was 15, I think. So I haven't smoked pot since I was a teenager.
Neither have I.
I'm fun. I like to have a good time and relax in just like, oh, let's just have fun. But really, I'm ultimately like an uptight person. And I don't like being relaxed and calm and chill. That's not my go-to, you know, so yeah, pot was fun and everything, but I really, it's just not it. Yeah, no, I just don't want to chill out and relax.
I haven't smoked pot since I was a teenager either. I started drinking. So my family had a bar in our basement. And it wasn't like a liquor cabinet that was locked or anything. My dad just had a bar in the basement. You know, there was a refrigerator full of beer, and there was a whole bunch of whiskey and vodka under the bar. And, you know, if I could go down there and drink, I could, but it didn't hold the fascination for me since it was so readily accessible.
Yeah.
I did drink when I went out with my friends as a teenager, but my friends were like super into drinking beer after beer after beer, and I would just like grab a cheap bottle of vodka and get annihilated immediately. And it just seemed to make more sense to me. Like, if we're going to get drunk and be goofs, like, I don't know why you're spending 2 hours trying to get drunk. Like, I'm just going to drink this bottle of Mad Dog and be completely blasted out of my mind in the next 15 minutes.
That's funny.
But then, so I don't know if you know or not, but I died at 18.
Right.
I had a heart attack and died. And obviously, they got me back. But from the time I recovered up until the age of 30, I didn't drink or do any drugs at all.
Right.
Unless it was medically supervised. When I was in college, I was trying to make money and figure out my brain. So I would subject myself to weird college experiments. And, they'd pay you $200 or $300 to do a drug and then watch you over the weekend. And so I would do stuff like that. But I didn't drink or anything until I got into a really bad breakup when I was 30. And then I started drinking again.
Right. That actually kind of sounds like fun, doing drugs for college experiments, like in a controlled environment. That actually sound, I was raised in, 1990s Llewellyn publication, Wicca books where no drinking, no drugs, and ritual, blah, 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 blah. And I realize now that that's just complete bullshit, because at no time in human history has, alcohol or hallucinogenics not been a part of spirituality, magic, So, the idea of doing like a hallucinogenic under controlled conditions, especially, being who I am nowadays, like I would, okay, fine, this is a college experiment, but I would, kind of use it to my own advantage and see, okay, what entities can I contact? What planes can I visit?
Yeah.
So that would be kind of cool, actually.
Yeah, I went it's funny because, I watched the rise in the last 20 years of people like taking ayahuasca trips and stuff like that. And I think it was 1996, I was friends with some kids at the University of Arizona who were going to Mexico to do ayahuasca for a college experiment. And so I got on that list. And so my ayahuasca trip was funded by a college and overseen by college professors. And I feel like what a great, for me, who does like to have things in a row sometimes, here is my nonsense, but then also here is someone's collecting data on it. So it actually made me feel a lot more secure in what was going on.
Yeah, absolutely. A friend of mine has been doing some experimentation with DMT, and he's been getting some really, really, really fascinating results with that. So it's exciting, kind of watching that unfold and seeing, the direction that goes. And it's really for me, who practices Enochian magic, it's especially fascinating because there seems to be a real link there. So yeah, I see. I wouldn't, and again, like here in Canada, like mushrooms are legal, so I can just go buy mushrooms. But I wouldn't, because I've never done them before. I'm here alone in my ritual room. I've done all the prep work, blah 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 blah. I've done my pentagram ritual. Great. That's all. I'm good to go. But it's not a controlled environment. Like, I'm by myself. I don't know. I just don't see myself doing anything like that. And and I know no one here personally, like physically in my town, who's a practicing ritual magician who has experience, with hallucinogenics in ritual, da 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 da. So I'm just gonna live vicariously through my friend and just enjoy those results. And someday I'll probably be in a situation, a controlled situation where I have the opportunity to try something like that, and I definitely will. And
So the
and I mean, if
experiment.
I die, like, whatever, it's there's well, I mean, there's worse ways to go, and I mean, unfortunately for everyone else on the planet, I'll be back, so
My favorite experiments that I did in the colleges, though, were the ones that. So, like, there was one experiment, it was a sleep deprivation experiment, and they kept me from microsleeping. So, whenever you do sleep deprivation experiments, usually there's this thing that's called microsleeps, where you'll fall asleep and you don't really know that you're asleep, and you only fall asleep for maybe like a second or 1.5 seconds or 2 seconds at the most.
right.
And you can exist on microsleeps for quite a long time. So I did an experiment where they were keeping me from microsleeping, this little electronic charges that would keep me awake. And that was one of the strangest mental experiences that I've ever had. I remember having a lengthy conversation with Annie Lennox during that experiment.
Oh, interesting.
And to this day, I have figured out that it would have been, I think, 8:15 in the morning when I was talking to Annie Lennox in England when she was in England. And I've always wanted to ask Annie Lennox, like, do you remember having a dream, or did you ever talk to me like 25 years ago? Because I am convinced I talked to Annie Lennox in that experiment.
Fascinating. I mean, I'm sure she listens to this podcast, because why wouldn't she? So, Annie, just reach out to John. He's on Twitter, so just reach out and let him know. That's great. That's
It showed me what my brain was capable of,
Yeah.
just through its natural processes. A similar thing happened. I was doing extended flotation tanks in an isolation chamber. And at one point, I think about 17 hours in or 18 hours in, I started thinking about my cat. And I started thinking, oh, did I feed my cat? And then the next thought that I had was, John didn't feed me. And then I realized I could see the inside of my house, but I could see it from my cat's perspective point of view. And then I thought to myself, oh, I'm not John, I'm the cat. And then I popped back into my body and was like, oh shit, I was just entangled for a second with my familiar.
Right. Now, that's actually really fascinating. Okay, like, having a conversation with Annie Lennox is one thing, because I mean, we have, human conversations all the time. So as interesting as that is, I mean, and it sounds a lot more fun having a conversation with Annie Lennox than, say, getting punched in the face by Bjork.
Right.
But so when you were like entangled with your cat, did you feel like yourself in your cat, or
No.
Okay, did you feel like what you would assume being a cat would feel like? Like, I wanna explore this more, because this sounds interesting.
Yeah, so the reason that I realized I was a cat, or I was in my cat's head or entangled with my cat, was because all of what seemed to be sensory information I was getting had changed.
Mm-hmm.
So when I say I was seeing my house from my cat's perspective, like, I knew it was my house. It was very dreamlike. I knew it was my house, but it was vastly different looking. The colors were different. It was associated not so much with how it looked, but with how it felt to me.
Oh.
I had gone from hearing my internalized thoughts as words to understanding my internalized thoughts through sensory information, through like the sound of my house and the feeling of my house. And that was all of a sudden there was this human moment where I was like, again, like the human words popped up, like, oh, I'm the cat. And that's what popped me back into my body.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I had ceased to experience this reality in a human way, which is what made me believe I was the cat.
Right. God, that's fascinating. That is really, really fascinating.
It was super strange.
Yeah, because you can't, no matter how well you articulate your experience, you can't really explain it in a way where we can process what you were experiencing, because we just don't experience our world that way. I mean, and the thing is that it sounds so fascinating. I can just imagine what it was like to experience it firsthand, you know?
I'll tell you what the strangest, not that the whole entire thing isn't strange and still is bizarre to me when I think about it. The first moment that I realized that I wasn't human was I got this overwhelming sense of physical balance. Like my whole body was balanced. And that's when I realized like that the house looked different, but I was in the house. And when I've reflected back on this now, almost 30 years later, it's interesting to me that like, is that how a cat orients itself in the universe? Is a self-balance, like their tail, their feet, their body posture, how they need to move. So like our first sense always seems to be sight, like we're so visually like, and you would think cats are that way too, but the way that I think about cats now is they experience the world through balance. And when I watch funny videos of cats, or when I watch the cats that I've had since then, like so much of their world is built around knowing their environment through where their body is in position to the environment and how their body is in position.
Right.
So it's interesting to think about how animals experience this world in a way that we don't.
Yeah. God, that's amazing. I can't even conceive of how I can't conceive of what you experienced. That's the amazing.
You just need to do 20 hours in a float tank and maybe you'll become one of your dogs.
No problem. I don't know if I could handle an hour. Honestly, I'd just be like, oh, this is boring. Like get me out of here. I'm done. I mean,
there is a lot of sleeping that happens in a tank when you're in there for that long.
I have things to do. I need to clean.
But when someone was, it was 95 and someone was paying me $500. Yeah. I'll do it.
Yeah, there you go. In 1995, there wasn't much I wouldn't do for $500. So
right?
There you go. Okay, so so you talked about like as a kid and comic books and being into D&D and blah 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 blah. When did you discover like, oh, magic is real and I can do magic? Like, were you young? Was it more of like a teenager, 20s? And how it kind of tied into like the whole like comic book D&D thing, like if that whole world, that whole fantastical fictional world kind of helped propel you on that path.
I mean, I was reading all of that stuff and I was very into fantasy and sci-fi all through my early teens and preteens. And obviously comic books, like I said, in Dungeons and Dragons. And I had probably read some books that had to do with witchcraft and magic. And the first witch that I met was a woman named Marion Kuklo, who was known as Gundella, and she was like Michigan's Green Witch. I met her at a metaphysical convention when I was 15 or 16 years old. And I was this, punk rock kid with spiky jacket and blue hair, and she came over and looked very much like my mother, a very heavy set lady and all full of laughter and love. And she sat down next to me because I was at this metaphysical convention sitting on a couch by myself. And I really, at the time, didn't want anything to do with anyone that looked like my mother.
Right.
And she just started talking to me about, like, you know, I had probably said something flippantly about like all the ladies wearing crystals and that type of thing. And she pointed out like all of the buttons and badges on my coat and the spikes on my coat and how they were my form of manifestation of like, I didn't want people to be near me. So I was covering myself with spikes and, you know, why I would pick such, if I didn't want people to be near me, why would I pick such a shocking color for my hair? So like, there's a part of me that does want to be noticed. And, you know, that blue is the sky, which is why you put it on top. And she started just explaining things that seemed to make so much sense that I had never thought of before. And in such a kind of beautiful, happy way. And she's laughing the whole time. And then she said, well, you know, if you want to go home, you can, you know, get this out of your pantry. You can get some black pepper and you should find a little candle. And, you know, you can write, you know, this person's name on it or this thing that you want. And she told me little spells and she wrote some down and gave them to me. And, you know, I went home, and because I was this punk rock kid who didn't like the way that my world was treating me, I thought, well, maybe these things work. This older woman is doing it and she seems to be really happy. Maybe I'll try and do this stuff too. And I think that's really where it started.
Okay. I'm always curious, you know, we love, you know, us people in the, you know, I'm just going to say, use the umbrella word occult. You know, when the Christians are like, oh, you got to ban the Harry Potter books. They make people, kids, practice witchcraft, and we're all like, oh, you guys don't know what you're talking about. Blah! But it's true. Same thing with Dungeons and Dragons, and it's all true. Yes, Harry Potter and Dungeons and Dragons made us the way we are. So I'm always curious, you know, whenever I speak to a guest, was there that sort of tie-in of you know, childhood entertainment, whether it be, you know, Harry Potter or comic books or Dungeons and Dragons, if there was something in those that was like, oh, that's I want that in my life, and then discovering that through magic. Like for me, it was like, you know, when I discovered ancient Egypt as a grade schooler and all the gods, and I just took it for granted that these gods existed. And it wasn't until I was 14 or no, 12 when I discovered Dungeons and Dragons. And I remember being really jealous of these characters in these books. I started with the Dragonlance books. I was really jealous that these characters got to interact with all of these different gods. And then at 14, I discover, you know, that people in real life do that. And it's like, oh, I can have what I'm reading about. And yeah, so I was just curious to see if that had any sort of kind of causal link to your...
It absolutely did. I mean, the same thing for me, you know, when those early conversations with Marion, and, you know, she even told me, she said at one point, this is a later conversation I had with her, where she said, like, you know, if you look back through your life, you can probably find times when you did magic. She's like, you know, if you think about it. And, you know, I did back, and I still remember, you know, I think Empire Strikes Back had just come out, and I was at school, and we were outside at recess, and I had taken a book outside, and I was sitting on top of the fence that separated the schoolyard from the neighbor's backyard that backed up to the school. And I was sitting on this fence post, and I was reading a book, and I was watching some kids having a snowball fight, and I was watching them because I knew that like someone was going to try and hit me with a snowball. Like I knew it instinctively, whether it was, you can call it, you know, psychic or just a little kid knowing that he was going to get traumatized.
Yeah.
But I had just seen Star Wars, and that whole idea of the Force like was in my mind. And I saw this kid threw a snowball at me, and I didn't block my face or my body. I looked right at it, and it flew like 4 inches away from the side of my head. And I swear that I turned it with my mind. Like, and I didn't really think about that until Marion had said, if you think back, you can probably remember when you did something that was magical. And that moment always kind of stuck with me because I was like, it should have hit me.
Right.
It should have hit me square in the face. But I was so intent on it not hitting me, I curved that snowball around my head.
Yeah.
And then as I started to think back more, and I started to think about when I would hit rocks with wet towels to make it rain, and when I would run in the wheat fields of my grandfather's house up north, and how I would talk to the wind and the sky, I was like, oh no, I have been doing this stuff that I'm reading about in comic books. I have been doing this stuff that I'm reading about in Dungeons and Dragons. Like, this is a thing. And so when I started doing little spells that Marion was giving me, and then, you know, she was teaching me how to craft my own spells. And then, you know, it was the same thing for me. It was the mid 80s. So, you know, Scott Cunningham is from Royal Oak, from where I'm at, my hometown.
Right.
And so, like, you know, reading Scott Cunningham books on witchcraft and, you know, finding out what flowers could do and what colors meant, like, that all made sense to me as a person who had been reading all of this stuff about gods and the manipulation of reality.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's interesting about the snowball, because I mean, sure, there's every likelihood that you literally, you know, use the Force to shift it, but I wonder if it's easily as likely that you I don't know, changed realities, you know, slipped into a different dimension where that snowball was never going to hit you. You know what I mean? And just, you know, manipulated.
Well, I mean, something happened with that. That sounds so funny to just talk about a random snowball being thrown, because something happened in the sense that that was the only snowball they threw at me.
Mm.
So not only do I think that I affected the snowball and curved it around me or popped into a separate reality or manipulated reality, but it affected them too, because then I was off the map. Like, all of a sudden, I don't need to have a snowball thrown at me anymore.
Right. Yeah.
Like, we couldn't hit that kid. He did something. Leave him alone.
Yeah, which is weird, because kids that age, you don't just throw one at a sitting target. I mean, you positioned yourself to be a target for snowballs. You're sitting on top of a fence.
Yeah.
And you're weird.
Yeah.
So you deserve it.
Right.
And it never happened except for that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. That is interesting. Yeah, that is genuinely interesting, actually.
So I think that's one of my little first magical moments. And then, you know, it did seem as a teenager, this is when I see the popularity of witchcraft now on social media, whether it's through TikTok or Twitter or wherever the kids are at these days. The thing that I think back to myself is the magic that I was doing very chaotically, because I even think around that time it was the rise of chaos magic. I mean, I wasn't introduced to it until later, but the fact that I was this sole practitioner, you know, aside from Marion giving me little spells, but me reading and constructing things out of the books I was reading in the 80s, the magic that I was doing as a 16 and 17-year-old was so fucking powerful, because as a 16 or 17-year-old, there was so much fear and anger and angst inside of me that it was just powering this stuff like mad. And so when I think about people doing it now who are teenagers, perhaps not quite realizing how powerful they are because they are just raging with emotions. I wonder what effects that actually does have, to have so many millions of teenage practitioners with this hyperkinetic energy that perhaps isn't focused and it's just blasting out in every direction.
Yeah. I sometimes think that my magic was more powerful then than it is now. And I mean, the shit that I'm doing now and, you know, the spirits that I'm invoking now, I mean, it's hardcore, but it's so controlled. Where being a teenager, you know, there's just that internal, and no matter how well adjusted you are as a teenager, there's just still that internal chaos, because that's what teenage years are. But I also wonder, I think there's a lot more talk on social media than action, you know, and people
Yes,
refer to it as like aesthetic witchcraft.
sure.
So I think there's a lot of that. So I think you can take those people probably out of the equation if they're talking more than actually doing any work.
Right.
But I also wonder, you know, there a lot of teenagers, and I probably would have too, like if social media was a thing back when I was a teenager. And yes, we had electricity back then, just saying, for all the young ones listening. But I probably would have been pretty public with it. And I question how that openness, and where you're filming, you're working and whatnot, if that's diluting the magic and whatnot, because you're giving so many people that are skeptics, or that just or are believers but are looking down at you because you're a 16-year-old doing magic. You're giving them the opportunity to send that sort of like negative suppressing energy towards your working. So I wonder if they're experiencing the power that we did as teenagers alone or in our bedrooms without that audience.
Well, yeah, I mean, I wonder that too. I wonder, like, so when I do any kind of magical practice now or ritual now, obviously, like I said, I allowed a certain amount of kind of nonsense into it, but I can't imagine there being, at least for me, and maybe this is just because I'm older, but I can't imagine there being a portion of my brain relegated to making sure I'm in camera frame properly. And in the background behind that, knowing that it's going to have to be edited. I'll have to take that part out. I have to put that filter on. I have to upload it by Tuesday. I have to get that. Like, there's all this other stuff that would be in the back of my mind while I'm trying to focus on this ritual that I'm doing.
Right.
That I feel like that energy would be better used on the ritual itself.
Yeah. And now that you bring, I wasn't even thinking about the whole like editing and filter, blah, 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 blah. That brings up an interesting question. If you start editing and filtering recordings of your workings, are you inadvertently editing and filtering your working? And the only reason why I'm bringing this up is, even up to say 6 months ago, I would have been really skeptic about the efficacy of doing virtual rituals, virtual workings with a cyber group that's spread out all over the place. And I'm in a group. My friend Frater RC has this Hermetic Mystery School, and we have Sunday Magic School, and we're a group. It's not a. I mean, we're private, but I mean, like, people can join his Hermetic Mystery School, and we've been doing some fascinating stuff with some really fascinating results, and it's making me rethink about the internet's usefulness in magic. So I'm wondering if there's more to technology in magic than I would have thought previously. In a good way, then it follows that there's more to technology when it comes to magic in a bad way, as in if you edit a recording of your working, are you editing your working?
Yeah, I mean, I've done for the past couple of years now, I've done a lot of experiments with doing seances and things virtually, and doing it in a way where I'm not trying to focus as much energy on making sure everybody's in camera frame and in shot. I think that obviously, when you talk about technology, especially doing magic, a wand is technology. You can use your finger just as well as you can use your wand,
Yeah.
and so it seems to go like, I think technology can be used beneficially. I don't know if it has to be, but it can be. The creation of the internet was done by people trying to enhance psychic powers with each other. A lot of people don't, know with all the studies that were done at SRI back in the 50s and 60s, when they were trying to do psychic tests across the country. And so they needed to develop this thing where you could talk to someone on the computer in California and they could talk back in New York. And then the government came in and took it away and then released it back to us as the internet.
Yeah.
But and if you look at how information exchanges now, it sometimes seems telepathic. I mean, obviously you have a lot of ads going into reading your histories and knowing what to serve you. But at the same time, too, with the rise of memes and looking at, how many times have I gone to Twitter and I'm about to post something that I think is a really crazy comment that no one has ever posted before, and someone will post it like 30 seconds before mine. And I'm like, shit, how did that happen?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think it can be. I think that the problem comes is when you start to, like you said, when you start to make your ritual look better to other people, like, you know how it is to you, and you know that it works to you, but then you start to move it around and edit it and change the sound and put the filter on it so that it looks better to who?
Mm-hmm.
To other people? Like, that's, yeah, I have a thing on YouTube. There's a little, I did advertising for a long time. That was the last real job that I had. And there's a little clip on YouTube. It's maybe 7 or 8 minutes long where I talk about advertising, because advertising is magic. It's the use of language and symbols to affect change in reality. And advertisers, whether or not they know they're doing magic, they're doing magic. They're getting you to recite slogans and see sigils and symbols in their products. And I feel like, although that type of magic is powerful, it also seems very contrived, and therefore I feel like it does itself a disservice when it becomes advertising.
Yeah.
Like you and I sitting doing a ritual together just right now is as powerful as it will be. To make it look better and sound better to other people, I don't know, that would be my ego taking over, and I don't know how my ego making me look better during a powerful ritual makes the ritual any more powerful.
Right. And I mean, I mean, I don't think it would, because you're not doing it to make the ritual more powerful. You're doing it to get more likes. But if you're, you're spending so much focus and energy on this working that you're holding it back, and now you're editing it and you're chopping bits out, and I don't know if that, if that, I don't know. I could just see, I can see you, because your magic has got to be tied into that energy that's in that video. It was there, it was in the room, it's a witness to it. And if you start chopping it up and changing it, I don't see how you don't affect the magic in your working.
Unless, of course, I mean, I could also, I mean, I can see creating a ritual that's meant to be chopped up. Like if you created a ritual that was a technological video TikTok version of like someone creating a sigil, like taking the original ritual and then deconstructing it and editing it and filtering it and changing it until it becomes a new ritual in and of itself.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But that's the thing, like it becomes a new ritual in itself, and that's different magic from the original working.
Right.
So I can see that being, completely, absolutely legitimate. Um, I just wouldn't then, if I did a ritual for a specific working, but still had the intention to chop it up and re recombine it for a different sigil, then I just wouldn't have any expectation that that original working would actually fulfill itself and do its intended role. Because I think the ultimate intention then in that case would be to chop it up, reconfigure, and to come up with the new sigil. So yeah, I don't know. These are things like, these are the questions that exist and are the reasons why I get like 3-4 hours sleep every night, because this is what I lay in bed thinking about,
I do the same thing.
Yeah.
Have you ever, have you, here's something I listen to a lot of podcasts and a lot of talks between occultists and magicians and witches, and what percentage of your magical workings over, let's just say a decade, over the last 10 years have gone totally horribly wrong?
None.
None?
None.
None?
Like, okay, sorry, I know, okay, I should actually ask you to clarify. You're saying totally horribly wrong. I'm thinking like just didn't work. But you're saying totally horribly wrong as in something just, it was monumentally bad.
Oh, okay, so I'll adjust my language. For me, totally horribly means nothing happened at all.
Oh, okay, well then.
So either nothing happened at all, or it went into left field where you didn't expect it and bonked somebody on the head, and you never meant that had to happen.
Okay, over the past 10 years, going completely left field, no. But going horribly wrong as in it just didn't work. That's hard to say. That's really, God, that's hard to say. That's really hard
Because
to say.
personally, I'll tell you personally, over the past 10 years, I've been trying to keep track because I started realizing probably in the late 90s, early 2000s that my magic, although I thought was standardized along my chronology. I didn't realize that fully. I don't think I fully realized that it wasn't temporally based, that it wasn't really based in time. No matter how much I grounded it out and tried to make this happen now. So I started trying to keep track of when did I do this so that this is happening now? Because sometimes it seems like nothing is happening and it didn't work.
Mm-hmm.
And then 5 years later, it works.
Yeah.
And then I look back and I go, oh, that's because I did this then and it's hitting now.
Yeah.
So it seems like I'm missing a lot, but I'm not.
Yeah. That's why questions like that are really difficult, because we may give a timeline for working, and that's all well and good. Doesn't mean it's actually going to work on that timeline. And, you know, with a lot of my work involves invoking. And so I always get when I invoke a spirit, I always get the spirit that I invoke. I may not get the answers that deep down I wanted. So it's still a successful working, because I set out to invoke and I did, but I didn't get, you know, the information I wanted. I got the information that was needed, just not wanted. So it's really hard to quantify success and failure in that regards. And I don't do a lot of practical magic on myself.
Mm-hmm.
I find that, you know, I have a really so I'm self-employed and I work from home. So I'm really, for the most part, really in control of my own schedule and whatnot. So I have a lot of freedom with my time. So I have a really good dedicated daily practice. And I find that keeping that regular practice up, you know, having a good focus on my spirituality, that I get everything I need when I need it, without having to, okay, you know what, I need to do a money working because I need one of my distributors to order now, you know.
Right.
I find everything comes in its proper time when it's needed. So I don't do a lot of like, oh, I got to do a money spell. I got to do a success spell. You know, as a matter of fact, the cyber guild thing we have going on with the Hermetic Mystery School, our first Enochian working the purpose was to ask about the sigil, like should there be specific colors for the sigil. And, you know, so we're asking King Kamara about the colors. And then, you know, if we wanted to ask Prince Hagenel, you know, to do something for us. And I'd thought in my head beforehand, I'm like, well, maybe I'll ask Prince Hagenel to just give me a little bump in my business. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to bother, because I know the answer that I want. I want him to obviously say, yeah, of course I will. I'm not going to bother. I'll just focus on the colors. And so we invoked King Kamara, then we invoked Prince Hagenel. We did the working, blah, 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 blah. We logged off. I banished. And I went on my computer, checking my email. And this was 9:02 p.m. I got an email, which was the same time we were invoking Prince Hagenel, who I was going to ask to give me a little bump in business, but decided not to. So technically I didn't ask. It was a company that emailed me. They're like, hey, we are interested in your products. We're wondering if you would consider us being your distributor for China and Hong Kong.
Perfect.
So, you know, I mean, sometimes you don't have to ask, but I mean,
Right.
they know what's in your hearts. That's
Right.
the thing, you know, they know what's in your heart. And I'm never greedy with my magic. I'm never like, oh, send me $1 million or make me win the lottery or, something like that. I was just like, oh, maybe I'll ask just for a little boost, maybe an extra order from a distributor. And so they were like, no, we'll do one better. We'll just give you your third distributor. How about that instead? So yeah, it's yeah. That's kind of, I don't know how we got on that from asking about results of like your question, but yeah, whatever. Anyways, it's hard to gauge results. It's hard to
Yes, absolutely.
with magic. It's really hard to say, okay, this was an absolute failure, and this was an absolute success.
Yeah.
Before
I answer that, can you put it on pause so I can run to the bathroom?
Yeah, absolutely. There we go. And we're back.
So one of the reasons that it interests me about working and things not working and is because of what we were talking about. There seems to be, with the technology that's being used right now, so many people who have the expectation that these either, magical rituals or manifestation rituals or invoking rituals are going to work right now, like on Twitter and on TikTok and stuff. Like, here's a ritual to get $1 million, and if you do it, it's going to work. If you didn't do it, you didn't do it right.
Right.
Like, that's the thing that's so interesting to me is, like I said, back in the late 90s and early 2000s, when I started realizing the kind of non-chronologically balanced magic, realizing that sometimes things aren't going to happen when you want them to happen. And now, whether it's the rise of instant gratification due to the internet, the idea that we did this thing and it didn't work, and so we must have done it wrong, kind of fascinates me.
Yeah. I mean, now a lot of people, of course, they're hustlers online, and they're like, I did this, it worked, I'm so amazing, you try it. Oh, it didn't work for you. Well, you didn't do it right. But hey, I have this course
Right.
that I sell. And I mean, normally it's $1,000, but I'm doing a promo right now and it's only $200. So maybe you should, sign up for the course.
I mean, so I was on a paranormal cruise a few years ago doing a lecture, and Amy Bruni from Kindred Spirits, it was her company's event. And she asked me, she said, is there something you can do for the guests, like after hours, after the VIP party and stuff? And I said, well, I'll do a big magic ritual with them. And she said, okay, what are you going to do? And I said, I don't know. Let me put it together and think it up, because I'm flying by the seat of my pants at this point. Like, I have to put something together for 150 people in an hour, So I'm like, okay, we're out in the ocean, we're in a big boat, and that nonsense part of me was like, we're going to manifest like a giant sea monster.
Right.
That's what we're going to do. We're going to make a giant sea monster. And so I get all these people out on the deck of the boat, and I have them all with their hands over the water, and I get them all into the same state, and I get them chanting, and I get them humming, and the horizon goes dark like black. And as soon as that happens, like hands start to drop, people start, because no one thinks that this is going to work. Like I'm telling them we're going to raise a sea monster. And as soon as the sun, like the sunset line, I mean, the sun had been down by this time. It was, 11 o'clock at night, so it was already dark. But all of a sudden, this patch of blackness appears on the ocean and starts coming toward the ship. And now people are walking away from the deck. They're walking away, and I'm like, no. I'm like, don't lose concentration now. Like this is the most important part. Like we're doing something, people. And people started freaking out and walking away, and the whole thing kind of broke, and then this big black mass kind of just vanished off into the night, and everybody laughed and said, isn't that really funny? And I was super concerned because I'm like, this ended in the worst way possible.
Right.
Something was happening, and now that is just gone. And I was trying to explain to the people on the deck, and the only person I had to talk to about this was Dana Newkirk was with me too. And so I was telling her, like, this is going to be a problem. Like, I don't know how it's going to be a problem, but it's going to be a problem that we just did this. And then it ended like that.
Yeah.
And also that all of a sudden people fed fear into it, like, is another problem as well. They started to get scared when something started to happen because they didn't think it was going to.
Yeah.
And all these people laughed and some were afraid and everybody thought it was really weird. And I was explaining to them, like, it hasn't gotten weird yet. Like, it's going to get weird for the rest of this ship cruise now because the way we stopped, like, I didn't have a chance to put anything away. And the next morning, all of these, like, my phone was blowing up on the ship. The next morning at like 6 o'clock in the morning, I wake up to foghorns on this ship. And no one is allowed out on the deck. The ship is surrounded in fog. The cruise ship is 75 miles off course. Now, if you don't know, if anybody's listening to this and has never been on a cruise ships are one of the most highly technologically created devices on the planet. They sail the same path back and forth all year long. They don't get lost.
Yeah.
Our ship was now lost in a fog bank, 70 miles off course. No one was allowed outside because you couldn't see the deck. And I'm at this event and I'm trying to tell the people, like, you guys did this. This is what happened. Like, this ship is now confused. It doesn't know where it's at. And thankfully I got enough people to calm it down that it worked. But it took, not only was something working at the time, but then it continued to work, even though no one was doing anything anymore because we had done this process. And I think it changed a lot of people on that ship's mind about magic, in that sometimes it takes time for what you're doing to work.
Yeah.
And that there do have to be some rules to it.
Yeah.
And so again, it comes back to when people do this $1 million magic ritual online. I'm sure your listeners and I are all very familiar with the idea of, like, don't make wishes because they come true, right? They just don't come true in the way that you want them to. It's a very monkey's paw thing. Yeah. And so when people say, like, oh, you're going to get a huge influx of money if you do this ritual this way, and it's a 40-second video showing you lighting a candle and 4 things to say to get this money, like, I think it can be very scary and damaging to the whole community.
Absolutely. I mean, because it could work, but you can also be in a vegetative state with a $1 million insurance settlement because you got into a car accident. You know what I mean? And the funny thing is, like with your working with the sea monster, it didn't work out the way you wanted it to. Not because the working wasn't successful, just because how, everyone reacted and, and backed away. So was that working a failure or a success? Well, technically it was a success because you meant to invoke something and you did. Just because it didn't turn out the way you had intended, doesn't mean it didn't work.
Yeah. Yeah. The second time that we did it, Dana actually helped me with it. So Dana and I did it together on a cruise ship. But instead of in trying to evoke a sea monster, I was like, okay, that was bad. We got lost the last time that we did this. I was like, we're going to do something that is much more helpful and bright, and is going to help do some healing on these people as well. And it went, and no pun intended, but swimmingly. Like it was great. We had all of these people, and we moved the clouds around all night so that the moon shone down on the ship. And then at some point, the entire ship. I mean, we're in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico, and people can look this up because I had to look it up when I went home because it didn't make any sense to me. But while we were doing the ritual, the entire ship was swarmed by dragonflies. They just appeared nowhere in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico around the whole ship. They were landing on people's shoulders and all over the deck. And it was just this amazing moment for these 100 people that were out there doing this. And then I went home and I was like, what did we run into? Like, what kind of weird thing was happening? And that never happens. Like, dragonflies don't fly over that area at that time in that type of swarm. Especially over huge patches of open water like that. They tend to stay in like shallower regions. And it was so amazing to have an experience like that work so well. And then also years later, seeing people at conventions who had bought dragonfly pins and were still wearing them and talking about being a part of this thing that happened, and seeing how special magic can be to people who don't do it.
Right. Yeah.
And how it really affects change in them.
Yeah, yeah, which is fantastic. I mean, it's a little thing. You can say, well, it's just dragonflies, but okay, fine. They're just dragonflies to me because I practice magic and I'm, used to, amazing things. But not everyone on that, I would imagine most of the guests on the ship, they're more like fans of the shows, and so it's more of like a celebrity experience, and you've given them a gift, and it's so important to give people happiness and love and just doing good things for people, and that's what you did. That's what you did, and that's just so important.
And I think one of the things that I thought was really amazing too, when Dana and I did that second one, was at the end of when we were bringing it to a close, we were explaining to everyone like we need you to thank the universe for allowing this to happen, like for us to be a part of it. And when we started saying that, people were looking at Dana and I and saying like, thank you for doing this. And we were like, no, that's not what this was about. This was about you connecting with the universe. Like, you did this, that you were a part of this. Like, you need to thank the universe for letting you have this experience, and that you can be here to have this experience. And it was really beautiful to watch people who don't do magic, have no background in magic, have no real interest in any kind of craft, and watching them realize that they were a true denizen of the universe, that they were a true part of it.
Right. Yeah. And
which I think is the power of magic too, right? Like understanding that you are this universe, that it's in you and of you.
And that's really important. That's a great lesson to get across to people who don't practice magic, is that connection to the universe, because you're a part of it, and you're the microcosm of the macrocosm, and how everything is linked, and again, it goes back to love and kindness, and and those things that are important. You know, like you doing stuff like this, you know, it sounds stage magic-y, not in a illusion way, but in a, you know, a showman's way. It sounds stage magic-y, but that's okay. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But you're affecting people in a good way, creating positive change, and that's all that matters. At the end of the day, that's all that matters. You know?
Yeah, and no, and there definitely, I mean, there's a part, at least for me in my magic, again, going kind of back to nonsense. Like, if I'm doing something like that with a bunch of people who don't know anything about magic, there has to be a certain amount of stagecraft to get their mind into the right place.
Absolutely.
There are certain people who all they have ever seen of magic is on television and in movies.
Yeah.
And so before we do that ritual, whether or not it means anything to me, I will write something in chalk on the ground that they don't understand. And in their mind, that starts to say like, oh, this is a thing that's going to happen. This is that thing that I saw. And that releases them enough so there has to be a certain amount of stagecraft for that.
But there's stagecraft when we do our own magic by ourselves, and you will see this in every Magic 101 book. Why do we put on robes? It's signifying in your mind that you're going to be doing something different. You're stepping outside of your mundane world and all of that. And even when I'm officiating rituals with other people that are experienced in magic, I'm still putting on a bit of performance. You know, the ritual movements and everything, they're done just so, you know, you're keeping people engaged. They, you know, these things serve a purpose magically, but there's also that bit of pomp and ceremony that keeps everyone engaged, keeps them in tune, and you know, it's that switch in the brain that, you know, it's magic time. It's not, you know, sit and veg in front of the television time. So all those little bits of performance actually play a role, whether you're with non-magical people or fellow, you know, magicians or
it's the power of ritual.
Yeah, absolutely.
To connect you to something and make you, like you said, to make you understand that something is about to happen. Something is going to happen.
Yeah.
That's why we're doing these specific things.
Yeah.
You know, that's why
I think a lot when talking about stuff in you know, the magical world and kind of relating it to mundane world things and, you know, the power of ritual. Well, we have mundane rituals all the time, and there's power behind them. So, I mean, I was just going to use a wedding as an example, and you know, that's not necessarily a mundane ritual, but most people experience it in a purely mundane way. But the giving of the walking down the aisle, the giving of the bride, the exchanging the rings, you might not be doing it with magic in your mind, so you might be seeing it as purely a mundane ritual, but it's still a ritual, and everything about it, from the clothing to the proper form of the ceremony, you're sitting there as a audience member, a guest. Click, it's now wedding time.
Well, you might have heard me, I talk about this at my lectures, and I've said it on other podcasts and stuff, but you know, if when we're talking about like day in, day out rituals that hold significance and power in our everyday mundane, quote unquote, life, you know, if you take the idea of putting on your vestments and listening to the elder who holds the sacred book and the keys, who tells the initiated what to do on the hollowed piece of ground that's covered with symbolic markings, that's surrounded by the uninitiated who chant and sing in unison, That is a football game. You have a coach, you have people that put on uniforms, the coach knows what's going to happen, you have a piece of hollowed ground with numbers and symbols on it, surrounded by people who chant and sing in unison to affect the change down on the hollowed piece of ground, to the extent where when the team on the field wins, the people in the stands say, "We did it."
Right. Yeah. Yeah. We won.
Yeah.
We won. Yeah.
Yeah. You know,
the the pandemic is really a good example of this. And the Olympics, so much of the coverage and the reporting of the Olympics included the psychological condition of the athletes, what it's going to be like for them competing in an empty stadium without the yells and the cheers, and how those yells and cheers drives the athletes, and it's all ritual. It's magic. It's all magic.
Sport. I say this jokingly, but I mean it in a pretty serious way. But sports is magic for jocks.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, you have someone on a field that hurls energy at another person on a field who has a magic wand to wave that energy away, you know, and then someone hopes to catch that energy and return it back at the person it was first focused at. I mean, that's a baseball game, right? And sports is magic for jocks.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's totally true. And, you know, if it wasn't true, I don't think Quidditch would have been a part of the Harry Potter novels, because you wouldn't, as a reader, you wouldn't have been able to relate.
Right.
It would have just been people flying around on brooms.
Right.
You wouldn't have been able to relate to the idea of this magical exercise as sport.
Mm-hmm.
But we experience that in our actual lives. Now, no one in that stadium is thinking magic, but that doesn't matter. That doesn't mean it's not magic.
But I think to some degree, and this is in that conversation I have in my lectures. My lectures are more talks than they are lectures, but I think that to some degree they are. They have, I mean, in sports you have a wealth of sympathetic magic. You have people who refuse to shave their beards, that have to wear their favorite shirt, that refuse to look at the net when the basket is thrown. That you have this magical thinking. They don't know that it's magic, but it is magical thinking in their brain.
Yeah, and that's just because they're not thinking magic doesn't mean it's not magic.
Right.
Because magic isn't based on knowing that magic is magic. Magic is the manipulation of energy and probabilities, you know.
Right.
So it's pure magic. Just because no one there is thinking magic doesn't mean it's not magic. Right.
And some of it gets, you know, some of it falls by the wayside after the magicians in sports decide to beat up the actual magical practitioners later on after the game.
Oh.
Got to beat those nerds up. They read all those books.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That's funny. That's funny. So, you know, so you did the comic books to Dungeons and Dragons to Witchcraft pipeline. And then at some point you got interested in, you know, all sorts of weirdness. UFOs, paranormal investigation, all that sort of stuff. Now, like, not everyone who's into the occult, who practices magic, is necessarily gets into, you know, the ufology and cryptids, you know, Sasquatch and, you know, chupacabra and whatnot, and even, you know, paranormal investigations. Like, UFO as a teenager, you know, going to the Black Unicorn for my magic stuff and my books and Cole's bookstores. You know, there's always like the witchcraft books, the magic books, and then ufologies right there along with it, and Bigfoot and whatnot. It never really grabbed it never fired my imagination. And to be honest, I don't think I was really aware of paranormal investigation as a thing, not really, until I was in my 20s. And Dana Newkirk, she had, well, she's from Canada, but for the listeners, when she was still in Canada, she had a paranormal investigation show.
Early Ghost Hunters.
Yeah, and it was on Space Channel, which is like Americans' sci-fi channel, and that was really my real first introduction to paranormal investigation. And then I discovered Paranormal State, and then Ghost Hunters, and Dana's show only went for Hi, everyone. Thank you for listening to the Lux Files. I'm not just the host of this podcast, I'm also the owner of Lailokens Awen. I make beeswax and scented spell candles, loose stick and liquid incense, anointing oils, and bath salts. So once you're done listening to this episode, why don't you head on over to my website at www.lailokensAwen.com and check out my products. For your convenience, the link to the website is also in the show notes. One season. So it was Paranormal State that I really fell in love with. And on reflection, I mean, looking back, I definitely had a lot more in common with the cast of Paranormal State, because they were just all visibly weirdos, as opposed to Ghost Hunters, which were just like, they were just such normal.
Right.
But still, it was never like, okay, well, this has to be part of my life too. Like as a person that practices magic and works with spirits, obviously I have to start doing paranormal investigation. You know what I mean? They can be very separate. They're not like you do one, you're automatically going to be into UFOs and paranormal investigation and cryptids and whatnot. So, but you are like, that's a big thing in your life. Did that come before the magic, like the interest in UFOs and weird stuff, or did that come later?
I think that for me personally, I think it all piled on at the same time. And since there was no one that really knew what was going on with any of it, whether I was reading a UFO book and there was no solid answer, and reading a Bigfoot book and there was no solid answer, and reading a ghost book and there was no solid answer, and reading a magic book and there was no solid answer. In my teenage brain, I was like, oh, so these are all kind of the same thing. And, I would read something by, when I was getting into my later teens, I would read something by Blavatsky or Steiner or even Alistair, and like they'd be saying similar things and using different names. And then when I would read UFO books, like they would say similar things but use different names. And then I was like, well, why can't those names from the UFO book be the same names that are being used differently in the magic books? Like, why does, if this magic practitioner is talking to, I don't even know, Leonard the Demon, and then this UFO contactee is talking to Aurora Rains, like, why do those have to be separate things? Why can't those entities be the same entity but being experienced by different people? And it just kind of carried out throughout my life, like talking to people who had been abducted by aliens, but then having the next day to talk to someone who said they were being possessed by a demon, and seeing the similarities between the two things. But the thing that was different was the experiencer. And saying to myself, like, is this all one thing? And then can these things be invoked? Can these things be created? It all just seemed to be watching the factions break up, watching them break into cryptozoology, ufology, witchcraft, the occult, conspiracy theory, ghost hunting, watching it break up, I was always like, I understand the wanting to explore each avenue, but there seems to me to be a centralized lobby that all of these avenues are connected to. What is that lobby?
Right. See, I never made that connection that you made, like, these could be the same things. Because, like these paranormal investigation shows, you don't see any magic.
No.
So I knew that there was an appeal for, with UFOs and cryptids and the paranormal, to people interested in the occult, just because it's weird and it's different, it's outside the box, it's not, quote unquote normal. But I didn't see the connection, because again, there wasn't really I wasn't seeing any magic on, these paranormal shows. Like a little bit with Elfie on Paranormal State. She did the LBRP in one episode,
Right.
But yeah, so I never made that connection, and so it was never really that never. I see it all as entertainment, because like I'll watch like a UFO show, or I love all of my paranormal investigation shows. I love Dead Files, Portals to Hell. I really enjoy Kindred Spirits. I really like, especially their last season was really good. But so these are forms of entertainment for me. If they're on television, I can sit and turn off my brain every once in a while. So yeah, so they're entertainment to me. They're forms of entertainment, as opposed to, well, this is a part of the occult crazy world of unknown questions and what ifs and how it all ties together. So I've never really been able to marry those two things, kind of, until recently.
Well,
But
I don't mean to interrupt, but
no.
I think that one of the things, to either my benefit or detriment, I've yet to figure that out, but the fact that I grew up in the era where, so there were always, we had occult bookstores here too in Detroit, and Mayflower Bookstore and Discount Candle and these places in Detroit. And they had, these old magical working books. And for a long time, the Equinox was published in Detroit back in the turn of the century.
Right.
And
Yeah.
So there was always that around too. But I think because of the era of no internet, and having to go to old libraries and find weird books, like I ended up reading books from the turn of the century where people were channeling Jesus, but he was on Mars.
Right.
And then like finding in my college, OCC, even when I was in high school and skipping and going to the college and looking at the college library, finding like the Journal of Borderland Sciences. And so you've got people channeling aliens, but they're also channeling ascended masters. And they're also talking about the UFOs that the ascended masters are on. And so for me, it never seemed like they were separated, I guess. It always seemed like they were the same thing, but just being interpreted and translated in different ways through different people.
Right. Yeah.
Where if I would have grown up watching it on TV, I would have probably thought that they were separate.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, looking back at the bookstores, like I said, the witchcraft and the magic is always side by side with the UFOs and all of that, but they're still separated. This is
Yes.
the witchcraft section, this is the magic section, this is UFOs, this is angels, and like these very, very clear divisions. And all of these paranormal shows, well, they're all, well, I have this gadget and this gizmo and blah 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 blah. So I just never made that connection. And even before then, like as a teenager, like I read about like cryptids and UFOs and whatnot, because I'm like, oh, okay, what's this? Because I'm curious. And that kind of like 80s 90s new age thing where magic, crystals, UFOs, they all
Yeah.
they had that connection, sort of. So I'm like, well, I'll explore this. And things like Bigfoot. I was never really able to wrap my head around, is it a physical being that we haven't discovered yet? And you hear books talk about, different dimensions and blah 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 blah. And I'm like, well, I don't have a conclusion, so I'm just going to say it's an astral being.
Right.
But all the other astral beings don't leave footprints and tufts of hair and blah 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 blah. So I'm like, you know what? I don't have an answer. I obviously I don't have the answer, but I don't have an answer that I'm I'm comfortable enough with in my head for it to just sit there. So I'm like, I don't know, but I'm also not particularly interested in this field anyways, for me to keep buying book after book after book to read as many theories as possible to come up with a conclusion. Same thing with UFOs. I mean, I'm fairly convinced that, well, first of all, I'm not at all convinced that UFOs have come from other planets in our galaxy or whatnot. I would, in my opinion, if they exist, they're coming from different dimensions. But that opens up a lot of other questions, especially in the New Age community. The word dimension and plane gets used kind of interchangeably. And I'm like, I don't even know, you hear there's people talking about different dimensions and blah, 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 blah. I don't even know what that means, actually.
Right.
What a different dimension is, And so back
I mean, I was just on a podcast, Bridget Marcourt, who was like one of Hugh Hefner's girlfriends.
Okay.
I was on her podcast, and we were talking about dimensions, and I was saying, like, similar to what you just said, which was like, I don't even really understand when people in the metaphysical community are talking about dimensions and planes of reality, like they're using them interchangeably. But when I think about it, the example I gave is like, I'm sitting in my family room right now, and if there's a squirrel on the deck of my house and the glass door is between us, like, we exist in completely separate realities. We exist in completely different dimensions, me and that squirrel. I am aware that he is there. He is probably not aware that I am here. He probably will only be aware if I got near him. If he came 5 feet closer inside, like, his vantage point would completely change. There's just a glass door between us. I can see him. Like, so when we talk about like dimensions, I think we're just really talking about perceptions of reality, right? Because that squirrel and I actually exist in the same, it seems that we exist in the same reality.
Yeah.
But we're experiencing two different realities. I experience one where he exists in mine with me. He's experiencing one where I don't exist at all. But we're in the same one together.
Yeah, which is a good way of describing it. But so, so many questions about like cryptids and UFOs and whatnot. I'm like, I don't know. And there's so many theories, like I said, that I just don't understand, because they start talking about, extra dimensional beings and portals and blah, 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 blah. And then you have the New Agers using dimensions and planes as interchangeable words. And I'm like, I have no idea what anyone's talking about. So, but again, still not really 100% interested in doing a whole lot of research because it still hasn't really grabbed my imagination. And then I discovered Hellier season 1. And this was, and I kind of kicked myself in the butt because I came across it via Twitter and just the name sounded cool. And I'm like, oh, hopefully this is some sort of like demon something. I don't know. It sounds like it's going to be demonic. So I'm going to click on it and Hellier.tv. I'm like, that just sounds sexy. Hellier.tv. I'm going to watch this. And so I watched all of season 1. I think I watched it all in one day. And it just blew my mind. And I didn't think there was, well, people were talking about it on social media, but not to the degree leading up to season 2. And I wish I started talking to these people sooner. Because now I have so many questions, but it's not questions like I'm so confused. It's so many questions like I've just had to reevaluate my entire perception of reality and the universe. So getting to the idea of like dimensions, I'm like, I don't know what a dimension is. So I Google like, what are dimensions of reality? And I came across an article about string theory. And in string theory, there's a theory that there's like 10 different dimensions or 11 different dimensions. And they're explaining, now, of course, we're all familiar with, you know, 1-dimensional, 2-dimensional, and 3-dimensional. But you go into the 4th dimension up to like the 10th dimension. And I was just like, my mind just exploded because they're basically talking about almost like a physical analog of what I read so much about, you know, astral planes, spiritual planes. There's always 10. And there's 10 dimensions in string theory, 10 astral planes, and, you know, go up to the 10th dimension in string theory, and everything that ever happened or ever will happen in any reality is happening at the exact same time. And that's how the 10th astral plane is described, because that's the plane of the divine, and we can't comprehend it because everything that's ever happened, ever will happen, all happening up at the same time. And I just, you know, the 9th plane in string theory, I'm like, oh my God, those are angels. And I'm just like, oh my God, I can reconcile aliens and UFOs and Sasquatch, and it all makes sense, and it's all real thanks to watching Hellier. And then I had a dream. And in this dream, someone was explaining planes and dimensions, but they're like a voice. It wasn't like someone in front of me. And they kind of like, okay, planes here, dimensions here. And it was almost like, you know, if you have like a ream of paper, you know, and each paper is, say, like a plane, and there was horizontal planes like from lower to higher, and those are like the spiritual planes, and then a ream of paper this way, and like those are like these physical different dimensions, and they're separate but they're still kind of conjoined. And then it twisted up into this shape that was 1-dimensional but also 3-dimensional but also more. It was so bizarre, and I woke up and I'm like, my mind is just fucked right now. And then season 2 came out, and ever since watching Hellier and Googling dimensions and learning about string theory and whatnot, I've spent these past 2 years or so just reevaluating everything in my life, every belief system, every opinion, every assumption. and that goes with my magic as well. And I found my magic has gone from here to here, just by saying what if.
Right. Yeah.
It was, I don't think I can understate how big deal Hellier is. And I watch it. I mean, I've watched it so many times each season. I just rewatch. And I always, in the back of my mind, I always am kind of not wanting to debunk it. I don't mean it that way, but looking for something to be like, you know what? No, none of these connections, these synchronicities, none of this is valid, because life was so much simpler before, going down this rabbit hole and just having to reevaluate everything I believe in and have an opinion on.
But it's funny because it's hard being friends with Greg and Dana, and I remember the night that they called me when they were filming. I didn't know anything about Hellier until they called me and talked to me on the phone, which is in the first season.
Yeah.
Because they're at the cabin and they're just lost and they don't know where to go or what to do. And we had they only show a few minutes of the conversation, but we talked for about an hour on the phone that night. And that was my first inkling that they were involved with something. And it always cracks me up, because if you watch the first season of Hellier, I tell them, like, you have to be careful because you'll get lost. Like, there have been a lot of people who have gotten to the edge, including myself, and you're in the Chapel Perilous, right? Like, you're about to cross the threshold and you might not come back.
Yeah.
And there are watchers at the gate. Like, there are a lot of difficulties that you can encounter if you're going to traverse this road. And I love the fact that wisdom and advice, or whatever you want to call it, my ramblings, is in that. But I love even more that they didn't take my advice.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Like, that's what I love.
Yeah.
Like, okay, we've heard what the negative of this can be. Let's push through it. That's what I find, being involved with them and knowing them and being friends with them. That's one of the reasons that I kind of love them, is like, when an elder or someone who has a little bit more insight into something tells you, like, you might not want to do this. I'm not telling you to not do it.
Yeah.
I'm just saying you might not want to.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that they chose to continue makes my heart so happy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, even for a purely, for purely entertainment quality, I'm glad they did, because just as a documentary to sit and watch, it's fascinating. But what that documentary has led to is big. And what I really like about Hellier is the wrong assumptions and the errors and the mistakes, because it just makes it so real.
Yeah.
Just makes it so real.
Yeah, it's something, as someone who's worked on a lot of paranormal reality television, and other people that I know, Michelle will tell you this from working on Paranormal State, and that whenever you try to throw a larger concept into a television show, it's just immediately rejected. Like, they don't want smart ideas. They have a system that drives, and that's the system they want. Mm-hmm. When I did in 2014, when I did the show Ghost Stalkers, we have a conversation in the last episode of the last episode that we filmed. The last 5 minutes is me talking about the Society for Psychical Research, the ghost hunters from the 1800s. So that was the first time on a paranormal reality show that the Society for Psychical Research had been mentioned. So ghost hunting shows had been on for almost 15 years, hundreds of hours of ghost hunting shows, and no one had ever mentioned the professors who had studied ghosts in the 1800s.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how hard we had to push to get new or different ideas. When I did my episode, the episode of Kindred Spirits that I did, when I was like, oh, this building might have an egregore in it.
Mm-hmm.
And we had to have an entire day conversation with producers and the television network about the word egregore and what it means and how it could relate to the situation, and our audience is going to know. And Amy and Adam, and we were like, we can explain this in like 2 minutes. Give us sitting with Chip at the end of the episode and just explain in 30 seconds the concept of an egregore,
Mm-hmm.
and audiences will be fine with it. And it was a great episode, and we got away with putting it on. Like, that's a good thing with having them be the producers of the show, is that you can fight less battles. But I've had television networks, I've said this over and over until I've blue in the face. I've had television networks tell me, straight-faced, we don't show smart people on television because it makes the audience feel dumb.
Right.
If we show dumb people on television, it makes the audience feel smart.
Yeah.
And now, with the way that television and media is being consumed, like, there's less of a stranglehold. The producers have less and less to say about it because people are consuming through TikTok, through Twitter, through YouTube, through self-financed documentaries like Hellier. All of a sudden, they're seeing, oh, you can show people smart people, and there's a response to it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that whole concept of showing dumb people to make the audience feel smart, that explains, certain shows.
Honey Boo Boo, Duck Dynasty. Like, when people watch those shows, they say, oh, I could do that. Why can't I be on television? That's exactly what producers want you to say.
It's funny that you say that, because when they did Haunted Salem Live, I can't remember, were you there?
No.
Okay, I didn't think so. So I'm watching it on Facebook.
Let me just tell you this too before you go any further.
Yeah.
The networks find me very problematic.
I don't doubt that for a second.
I don't get called to do a lot of shows because I demand things like being able to see my edits. I rewrite my voiceovers. Like, I walk off of sets if I don't, like, I'm problematic.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's nothing wrong with controlling your image. You know what I mean?
Well, I'm not gonna sink 30 years of my reputation for 30 seconds of television.
Yeah, and because we know how reality TV is edited. Yeah. So what was I? Just a little aside about Haunted Salem Live, because I just found this so funny. So I'm watching it on Facebook, and at its height, there was like 11,000 viewers on Facebook. And of the 11,000 viewers, about half of them were just normal people, fans of all these paranormal shows. They were just having a great time. Out of the other half, so 5,500 people, half of those were all either Sarah Good or Goody, I don't know what her last name is, reincarnated or related to her.
Right.
So there was about 2,000 reincarnations of Sarah. I think Sarah is
I think that's Sarah Good. Yeah.
Sarah Good, yeah. And then the other 2,000 or so were all witch queens and high magical adepts. And they're like, oh, you shouldn't have done this that way. I would have done it this way. I could do this better. Why don't I have a show? And just the amount of people, oh, I can do this better. Why don't I have a show? Hey, Travel Channel, give me a show. I'm a witch. It was just, I'm like, I don't know what's more entertaining, reading all the comments, the viewer comments on Facebook, or watching the show. I mean, I missed a lot of the show because I was glued to the comments. It was hilarious. But yeah, all these people, they were reincarnated Sarah Good, or the direct descendant of Sarah Good, and all of, oh, you can't do it that way. You have to do it this way. Travel Channel, give me a show. I'm like, they're going to call you tomorrow. They're on it.
As a side note, I went, this is probably 25 years ago, but I went to a past lives convention in California back in the mid 90s and watched two Napoleons get in a fight over who was Napoleon in their past life.
Oh, I love it. It's so funny. It's so funny.
And I was arguing with them. I was like, you could both have been Napoleon.
Why not? You know, why not? I just,
people want to be, I'll tell you, again, just from my own personal experience, people who want to be on television, especially reality television, the glitz and glamour of filming 16 hours in a location that doesn't have a bathroom, and the only thing you have to eat are bananas and crackers, and you're being paid like $1,000 for the day, is not great.
Yeah. But yeah, no, but I mean, God, I just those comments, oh my God, it was just hilarious. It was so funny. I just, to this day, I mean, it's been 3 years, and I just relive that over and over again because it was just so amusing, entertaining, and bizarre at the same time. It was just.
Well, I mean, when Hellier first came out, like I remember when I was talking to Greg and Dana and Carl and Connor and Tyler and all of them when it first came out, and it was just amazing to me how the magical community had formed into two columns, and there was just this one half that was so upset with the mispronunciation of Aleister Crowley. And it couldn't be believed, and Dana wasn't doing tarot right, and then there was this other half that was just like, this is actually amazing to see people experimenting and doing something new. It was so funny to watch where it was breaking. And like for Greg and Dana originally, I mean, they obviously got a thick shell pretty fast.
Yeah.
But initially, like, they were just like, oh my God, what did we do? Like, we never expected people to come at us in this way.
Yeah.
And it's like, but you're challenging people's realities. Yeah. Like, it's going to get heated sometimes.
Of course, absolutely. One of my favorite parts of Hellier, and it's such a small, innocuous part, is when Greg is pointing out a photo of Osiris, and because he's making all the connections with Pan and the horns on Osiris's crown. Well, of course, they're feathers. They're not horns. But I love that part so much because it was so genuine.
Yeah.
And the fact that it was wrong speaks to the authenticity of the program, because you see a lot of comments on Twitter about it being just all completely made up. If you are trying to make something up and make it look valid, you do your research, you have your ducks in a row. But I will say, in a way, it would be cool if Hellier was all completely fake, because the creative genius that it would take to create Hellier with all the twists and turns, like, that's creative genius. And that level of creative genius deserves to be, like, we need that level of creative genius in the world. So if it was fake, oh, so great. But it's so authentic. And
it's strange as a person who, so like, when they were doing part 2, so I found out, I saw them at Michigan Paracon that year, and that was in August. It's always at the end of August. It's coming up now at the end. I'm going next week, but it was a couple years ago. But they were filming part 2, and they said they were filming part 2, and I hosted a panel for part 1. And people were asking, like, am I going to be in part 2? And I was like, if I'm necessary, then I'll be in part 2. But like, this is an unscripted reality documentary they're making. So I have no idea if I'm going to be in it or not. And Greg and Dana and Carl and Connor and I think it was Connor was like, how awesome was it that you don't want to be a part of this? And I said, well, it's not that I don't want to be in a part of it. It's just that I know that what you're doing is so valid. I don't want to be in it unless I am needed to be in it.
Yeah.
Like, I wish that more people could be like that. Like, I don't need to be involved. If I am needed, I'm here. But if I'm not, don't pigeonhole me in. And I think it was literally like 2 weeks later, Connor had been working with the numbers, and he had been texting me back and forth on certain numbers and what did they mean and how could they apply to like occult language and occult philosophy. And we were just going round and round about stuff. And he called me and said, what are you doing tonight? And he was in Colorado, and I said, I'm not doing anything. And he was like, I'm in Cincinnati with Greg and Dana. We're actually an hour outside of Detroit. So we need to talk to you. And in season 2, you see us in a hotel room. Like, they literally drove here, rented a hotel room. I went to that hotel. We filmed that segment, and they were like, thanks for your ideas, Tenney. We're out. And then they were gone. And so, like, I had no idea what was going on or what they were thinking. Yeah. Like, that's the reality of making a reality show.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, that's what I love. When I've filmed reality shows for television, there's literally, for reality shows, a script. Here's how it starts and here's how it's going to end. Mm-hmm. This stuff in the middle can be fluid, but here you have to have an out point for television.
Yeah.
With the thing that I love the most about Hellier is you never know who's going to be involved. Like, when I found out, they came here and we filmed the segment at the hotel, and then Greg was like, oh, we talked to Greenfield for the documentary. And I was like, what? How did he? And they were like, yeah, of course. And so I was like, holy smokes, like, he's going to be in this now. Like, look out, here we go. Like,
yeah. The only criticism I have, and this is just more of a moral thing, with Hellier is Tanya
Derenberger.
No, sorry, no, not Tanya. The girl that sent the email in season 2.
I can't remember her name, but
it doesn't matter. Sitting, she sends this email asking for help, and sitting on that email for so long, for so many months. I'm like, oh my God, you can't do that. Like, someone calls for help, you go. I mean, I get, Greg's point, it's just, I'm half jokingly saying a criticism, but I'm like, when someone calls and needs help, you answer, you just go. And it's scary. I mean, I know at one point, talking about like those cults around Somerset, and Connor's like, I just want to get out of here. I'm like, you can't blame someone for being nervous with these kind of stories, but
I'll tell you something about Connor, and I don't know.
You got to help people. When people call you for help, you're meant to help, and just do
I agree.
And I mean, like, try not to die. It'd be great if you didn't die. But, I mean, shit happens.
I don't have NDAs, with Greg and Dana and all of them. I will tell you that, I don't know, it wasn't filmed, but a really magical part for me doing Hellier is we filmed that part. They came out here, they rented the hotel room. We talked for like 3 hours. And then for me, the most important part of Hellier was this part that never got filmed and was never shown, which was at the time, Connor, who is religious, Connor is a mostly very religious Catholic, or not Catholic, but Christian person.
Right.
And after we had our hotel conversation and filmed all that, and they were wrapping up and getting ready to leave, Connor and I went outside and had, I don't know, a 45-minute talk where he was having a crisis of faith. And like, that was, we talked, and we very quickly got very deep. on what it means and how you can hold contrary viewpoints and still have a belief structure and system, and how that can evolve. And like, it was, that for me was like, oh, this is the reason that I did this season.
Right.
It wasn't for what got shown.
Yeah.
It was so that I could help, hopefully, Connor continue on filming this show.
Yeah.
Because he was at a point where I don't think he wanted to do it anymore.
Yeah, and you see a bit of that, you know, in the documentary, but I don't think to the degree, the actual degree of, I have a feeling anyways, to the actual degree of how he was feeling.
Well, you know this, and occultists are, and this is something I probably said to Connor, occultists are all too familiar with this, but, you know, back to my original message in the first Hellier about you can get lost and you can find that edge. That happens with a lot of occultists when you start playing with numbers. Your brain goes to a very weird spot when you start seeing the numbers as more than numbers, and you start recognizing what they might point to. Like, that can do something to you. You know, I have lost friends who have gotten lost in the numbers in trying to figure out that line, that letter over. Like, I've seen people, I've lost people to stuff like that.
Yeah.
And that's where Connor was when they gave him the numbers. He started on the numbers and started to get lost.
Yeah. Which isn't a surprise, because just knowing, knowing the power and the value of numbers and symbols, and yeah, I mean, I get it. And for someone, not prepared, I can see where he's coming from. Because I mean, you can be prepared and experienced as an occultist and still start losing yourself.
Mm-hmm.
We all know that. We all know that,
And so then you take a nice Christian boy like Connor and you introduce him to synchromysticism and occultism and, occult number systems and magic. That can really fry someone's brain.
Yeah. Well, he's looking over his shoulder for black-robed, killers.
While Greg drags him into a cave to play tones and Io Pan.
If I was a friend of Connor's, I think I would be really proud of him, just being that good Christian boy in a cave, in a magic circle, invoking Pan. Like, he has to give himself a pat on the back for his willingness and his open-mindedness to, go the distance and see where this takes him.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Greg and Dana, it's very much their project.
Mm-hmm.
Carl has the wall of a camera between him and what's going on.
Yeah.
Tyler is insane, so it really doesn't really care what's going on. Connor is the grounded one who has to experience all of this stuff. I mean, I love Connor. I too am very proud of his ability to. Connor is very much so the Hermes of the series. He can descend and return. Like, I don't know if people catch that. It seems like maybe all of them are doing that, but he really is this mercurial being that can float between the worlds.
Yeah, you can see that though in the documentary. You really can. It's just a whole fascinating project, and like I said, it just made me have to reevaluate everything that I hold opinions on, and I think for the better, because I've always been really open to experimenting with magic in a smart way, not in, you know, ridiculous ways. I always use the example, like, I'm not going to experiment by invoking air with my water cup to see what happens. Like, that's just dumb. I'm not going to do that. But, you know, like, I don't know unless I try. So I'm going to give this a try. So I've always had that kind of mentality. But now that I'm reevaluating so much of my opinions and belief systems and whatnot because of Hellier, that level of experimentation and that what if just, you know, increased tenfold. And I think so did my magic, like I was saying earlier. I think because I've just kind of let go, opened myself up and said, let's just see what happens.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
so yeah, so it was a big deal for me to, you know, come across that, you know, Facebook post, you know, with this Hellier photo and being like, oh, that sounds sexy. That sounds like demons. I'm all into demons. So let's watch whatever.
It is very strange how it finds who it finds.
Yeah. Yeah. If it was like, oh, Hellier, we're searching for goblins, I would have been like, I'll, you know, screenshot this and I'll, you know, maybe come around to it sometime. But it just,
but
like,
you know, that's what people wanted, right? Like, that's what a lot of people wanted.
Yeah, but you know, when like Hellier, hell, demons, I didn't know if I was watching, if at first, if this was a movie or a documentary. Oh, it's a documentary. Ooh, documentary about demons, about people going to be hunting for demons, like paranormal investigation, but for demons, not ghosts. Ooh, this is exciting. Hit play. And then it's like, oh, goblins. And I'm like, well, the graphics, the music, I'm like, I'm all in already, because just that, the beginning, the music, I'm like, I'm hooked. And then I watched it and I'm like, yeah, just boom.
It was amazing when it was amazing when I watched it for the first time too.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that they called me when they were doing it. I didn't know that they had filmed our phone call.
Right.
You know, so I didn't even know that I was in it until Greg told me, "Oh, you're in one episode. We filmed that phone call with you."
Yeah.
Like, I didn't know. And watching it was as magical for me as it was for most people who watched it with an open mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I liked about it too was seeing the magic with the gadgets. Because you just don't see that in paranormal investigation shows. And like with you practicing magic and doing paranormal investigations, do you do magic when you're investigating, or
it depends. Sometimes, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it depends. Sometimes I'll do something for myself that maybe the guests don't know is going on. Like, they'll just walk into a room and see that I've lit some candles, but they don't know that something has happened before they got in there.
Right.
But I usually gauge the crowd that I'm with if I'm going to try something really out there, just because, you know, doing those kind of larger experiments I talked about earlier, like on the cruise ship, I know that those people are in. Those cruises are super expensive. Those people want an experience. Like, I knew what I could get away with because of what their mind, or the situation they had already put themselves in, being on the cruise ship. I knew I could do that.
Right.
A lot of times with smaller investigations, I know that people are just there and they want to walk around with their K2 meters and look for ghosts. But, you know, if I feel that the situation is open, or people are, if I listen to the conversations the days of, you know, before the investigation, and I see that people are open to those ideas, then yeah, I'll put some magic into it.
Okay. Okay. Because Michelle Belanger and I were talking about that, and her and I are. I can't talk about that. Never mind. Never mind.
All right.
I'll tell you when we finish recording. Little. Anyways. Yeah. So just talking about magic during paranormal investigations, and I'm like, I don't really. I mean, I have an idea of what that looks like, but I've never seen it. And I mean, I'm not a paranormal investigator. I've never done a paranormal investigation. So I have an idea of what it looks like in my head. I write occult detective fiction. So, you know, that it's what I write is going to be more of an exaggerated version of any size, I'm sure, any sort of magic going on in a paranormal investigation. But it's just,
I did a event recently, and so at the Belvoir Winery, and Amy always puts me outside at the cemetery so that I can smoke. And the cemetery is not a great place to do an investigation because we're there at night. It backs up to a residential neighborhood. There's traffic. There's a lot of bug sounds and animal sounds, so you can't really do recording. And so in those situations, a lot of times what I'll do is I'll sit down and I'll tell everybody, you can investigate if you want, but I'm going to sit here and I'm going to tell you stories, and we're going to have a very weird experience. And then people will sit around, and I've already gotten them into, by that point, a mental state to where I can tell them, like, okay, now I want you all to, just relax, put your hands here. I'm just going to hum a little bit before I tell this story, and I want people, and so you can move people that way. You can do real slight magic in that way.
Yeah.
And then people will have experiences. And it's one of those great things too, where does we were talking earlier about the stagecraft of it and the showmanship, like, where does that end? Because one of the things I did very early on when I was in college was I joined like the International Brotherhood of Magicians and the Society for American Magicians, so that I could learn stage magic and right. stage hypnotism and stuff like that, aside from like clinical hypnotism and neuro-linguistic programming and things like that. But how many stage magicians I know who have psychic routines where every single one of them at some point in their psychic routine starts to manifest psychic powers.
Right.
And they will tell you that openly. Like, I don't know how that trick worked. That trick was going wrong. And I pulled this information out of I made it up.
Right.
But it worked.
Right. Yeah.
And so, there is a certain amount of, like we were talking earlier about, whether it's the ritual and putting on the robes, the showmanship and the stagecraft can have an actual effect.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's why when I do my, even my most basic daily rituals, I robe up, I go through the whole process, the whole rigmarole, just because it puts me in the frame of mind, the mindset that I need to do effective magic, even if it's just, I mean, I talk about, the luxury that I have with time and, being self-employed, but, I can be so busy some weeks where I'm lucky if my daily routine is middle pillar exercise.
Right.
But if that's all I'm doing, when I'm doing it, I'm all in.
Yeah.
I'm doing the whole shebang, and that means robing up, the incense, the candles, everything, because I want to do it right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the rituals,
that showmanship it's absolutely a legitimate part of magic.
Yeah, one of the rituals that I don't robe up for it, but that gets all of the showman treatment. I have a big standing stone in my backyard that I use for a lot of ritual. And it always cracks me up because I've lived in the same place now for like 12 years. But, when I first started going out there to do ritual, I live on a corner lot, so my backyard is open to the rest of the neighborhood.
Okay.
And to see me out there, you know, in the middle of a full moon around this giant standing stone with these candles and incense going, it's very silly to me to think like that my neighbors are like, yeah, that's just John. Like at first I knew for a while the neighbors were, what the fuck is going on over there?
Yeah.
But it is one of those things that it needs, at least that ritual that I do there, it does need the presentation. It needs me to be fully in. It needs the light and the candles, and it needs the magic wand, and it needs the standing stone for it to work if it's going to work.
Yeah. You know, it's funny having, you know, an audience, you know, neighbors. It makes me think, you know, having conversation with a friend of mine about, you know, like recording videos of your rituals and putting them on YouTube or whatnot. And I'm like, you know, and I was actually, I think I was having a conversation with, I'm sure I was having a conversation with this, with Thorn Mooney on the episode, her episode. And, you know, while you're doing this ritual, you're so powerful and you're so into it and you're feeling so amazing. But when you watch it, you look like a complete idiot. Complete idiot. You sound stupid. You look stupid. Everything you're doing is stupid. And that's how you look to your neighbors. But meanwhile, in your sphere of sensation, there's just so much going on, and you're doing real magic, and you're creating real change, and you're invoking real spirits. And it's so amazing. But to watch it from the outside, it's just completely ridiculous. It was Thorn Moon because we were talking about visual representations of magic and witchcraft in entertainment, and how exaggerated it is, and you know, real witches being like, oh, that's not real magic. No, it isn't, because number one, this is entertainment, and number two, if they filmed real
It
magic,
looks cool.
it would be stupid, and it would be dumb looking, and it would be boring. So I need them to film magic the way I'm feeling my magic. So the fireballs and the lightning bolts shooting from their fingertips, and the flying, and you know, putting your hands to the side of your head and sending out of this force that throws your enemy, like that's how I'm feeling when I'm doing magic. So you need to create a visual representation of that, because if your entertainment magic for whatever movie is an actual ritual, it's going to be a snooze fest.
I might argue that as more people practiced magic, as it really came to its forefront in, you know, the turn of the century and moved into its modern era, I could possibly make an argument that that which we are manifesting and invoking has found necessary, knowing that it doesn't look great to the outsider, to find those who represent it to a larger public, to show it in what it seems like to us.
Yeah.
That, you know, we talk a lot in magical and occult communities about the need for a certain amount of creativity, and that we're creative individuals and we all like to paint and make music and sing and do all these wonderful creative things. And it's not beyond the pale for me that the sphere of magic has found its way into the minds of video editors and special effects creators to manifest itself in the way that we feel when we're doing it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What is the best recruiter for the occult community? It's not the Golden Dawn orders, as great as they are. It's not your favorite Wiccan author or witchcraft author or whatever, because you already had the interest, which led you to their books. It's the books that you're reading, it's Dungeons and Dragons, it's Harry Potter, it's the magic that you're seeing,
Mm-hmm.
and you want a piece of that, and you find it in the occult.
How many people would become occultists, would become practicing magicians, if the only representation was someone alone in their room doing like the lesser banishing ritual in their shorts?
Yeah, exactly.
Like everybody would be like, what the fuck is that?
Exactly.
I don't want to look like that.
But even,
I'm not going to do that.
Yeah, but even like some of us that have the luxury of having like an actual ritual chamber and having the whole setup, and everything is to a T, the way the Golden Dawn dictates, the temple should be set up, blah blah blah, and your robe and blah 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 blah. Everything is to perfection. It still looks stupid on video. That's not going to attract anyone either. You know what I mean? It's
watching Freemasonic rituals isn't exciting.
No.
For a person in the ritual, though.
Yeah.
Experiencing it in their mind.
Yeah.
It's an amazing process.
Yeah. Yeah. But we need that visual representation of what we're feeling, and we get that now in movies and television shows, and it's really our best advertising.
Mm-hmm.
It really is. Can we take a break for a moment?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. And we're back again.
So I guess I kind of stumbled into magic. I mean, it found me, I guess, through all of my likes and the things that I thought were interesting. And I went through this period of time where I had friends who were very into ritual and ceremonial magic, and the Blue Lodges in Detroit for the OTO and all of this stuff back. And how did you find ritualistic magic?
So when I was 19, I discovered magic via witchcraft, which back then, this is 1992, so witchcraft and Wicca back then was the exact same thing, basically, in publishing.
Right.
So I'm practicing solo, and then a couple of my friends, oh, that's interesting, invite them to do circle. So very casual, very eclectic. And when I was 19, I met a guy who turns out he was in a Gardnerian coven, like an actual lineaged Gardnerian coven. So I joined, and it's funny because I ended up moving to Ottawa. So I didn't finish the 3-year training, but I don't think I would have finished even if I didn't move, because like Gardnerian Wicca is very ceremonial. It's not like, I always say like rolling around in the dirt, magic, which was kind of more what I was looking for, which led me to Druidry, and I joined OBOD. But the whole ritual magic, like Golden Dawn, system of magic always really appealed to me, and I always seemed to come back to it. And with OBOD's sort of style of Druidry, there's a lot of, I mean, it has that lodge history to begin with, so you see the elements to it, but it has a lot of flexibility with how you practice your Druidry within the OBOD tradition. So I went through my OBOD training, initiation and whatnot, blah 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 blah. Decided I would kind of re-explore the Golden Dawn system magic, and Chick and Tabitha Cicero published Self-Initiation into the Golden Dawn Tradition, which I'm not going to get into, the merits of that book because,
Right.
I've covered that in other episodes. But I tried going through. Well, I will say about the book is not really. I mean, it would have been better titled "How to Run a Golden Dawn Lodge," like for a Hierophant, as opposed to Self-Initiation, because they basically took the Golden Dawn, temple work and put it in a book, and it's lacking in certain ways. But I tried, I worked through, all the grades up to Portal, hit a brick wall.
But you were always interested in there being an outline.
Yeah. I mean, I realized quickly, like I said, I was looking for rolling around in the dirt magic, really earthy and whatnot. But at my core, the very structured, ritualistic, ceremonial aspect is where my heart is and where I really excel. Like I'm better at Golden Dawn style Enochian magic, where you're constructing a truncated pyramid and a sphinx and a god form for the altar. Like, I'm better at that than I am at rubbing two sticks together in the woods and
Right.
getting results. You know what I mean? It's just more true to who I am.
I think for me, and obviously, we're shaped and formed by early experiences, but I don't know what was going on. I mean, I do, but the mid 80s to probably early 90s, every time someone approached me, whether it to join the Blue Lodge or to become a Rosicrucian or any type of like systematic ceremonial initiatory process, very quickly again, and I've been so out of that system of workings for so long, but in the 80s and 90s, everyone that I met was a fucking creep.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know if it was just that era, but like every single person I'd be like, oh, this sounds interesting. I will hang out with this person and maybe join this lodge. Maybe I will join. No, I'm not going to. These fucking people are creeps.
Yeah. It's so hard because
and so many people too. I mean, I'm sure that this probably still goes on. There are still so many people who are cosplaying.
oh yeah. Of course, absolutely. I think back then, you didn't have the easy access to magic and other practitioners like you do today, thanks to the internet.
True.
So, your only access besides books were to join groups, whether it's a coven or a lodge. So I think the quality of person was less so back then, because I think there was a tendency more to give every seeker a chance. And you didn't have, social media. Let's check out what they're like on social media to kind of vet them. I mean, there's always going to be creeps in the community, because there's always going to be creeps in the world.
Sure.
I think that the nature of our reality today with our lives just out there online can make things a little bit easier for vetting. You know, it doesn't take too much of scrolling through your Facebook profile or your Twitter feed, not your feed, your Twitter profile to get a semblance of who you are as a person. Now, of course, a lot of our personality online on social media is fake, but if you're posting some pretty dodgy shit,
Right.
you may not really buy into that dodgy shit 100%, but you're still posting dodgy shit. So if I'm vetting you as a potential member for my group and I'm seeing this dodgy shit.
No, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, this is, the inability in the 80s and 70s and 80s and early 90s, the inability to, I mean, I know people who were initiated and these high magicians because they had their PhD in philosophy and had never gone to college. But how did you check back then if they even went to college?
Yeah.
They were just making shit up so that they could move into the area, sometimes try and forcefully take over a coven or a lodge. Then there's infighting between everybody. Now you've got breaks in the lodge, and it was just so. Yeah, I guess you're right. Like the ability to check people must make a difference.
Yeah. But I mean, there's still going to be, creep. And the thing too is that, and you know this as well as I do, and we kind of touched on this a bit, talking about the numbers and whatnot. Magic can break people.
Yeah.
Magic isn't easy. It's not pretty. It's not cute. It's serious and it can break people. So you could have someone who is fairly normal. I'm just going to use the word normal. That, may have some slight, not, any major mental health issues or psychological issues, but, we all have our issues and, have those issues amplified to the point where they just they just break down.
Well, and then the other thing is too, no names obviously, but there was a practitioner here in Detroit who for a long time was great, and watching what it did kind of egoically to him, and then watching him create a cult of personality around himself, and then watching it deteriorate and manifest in the most horrible of ways. And he's still here, and still people who follow him around at his every word. But it's apparent to anyone who's serious, I guess. He has a lot of young acolytes who, find him, but very quickly tap out because they realize that it's about him and not about magic.
Yeah. Adepthood changes you. Like true adepthood changes you, and it changes you. It doesn't make a bad person good or a good person bad. It amplify, like if you're a good person, you're going to become a better person. If you're a bad person, you're going to become a worse person. It changes you in that way. It's not going to change you fundamentally. It's not going to save you. Adepthood isn't necessarily, like adepthood and enlightenment don't necessarily go hand in hand. Right. And at the end of the day, like with the Golden Dawn schisming, and even nowadays it's still going on. Clash of personalities, egos, these are organizations of humans, of people, and you're gonna have human problems. Um, just because you're an adept doesn't mean you're so enlightened and you're beyond, these base human emotions and urges and instincts. So you still get assholes, you still get egomaniacs, um, big personalities, and they're still adapts. It doesn't negate their
Does it?
it,
Does it? Because I guess this, I guess I'm bringing this up because I guess it does bother me, and I'm going to ask if it bothers you. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe this is just part of my journey, but it bothers me when someone cannot stop talking about how good they are at magic. Does that bother you at all?
it drives me nuts, yes, because if you're I always I there's one Facebook group that I'm a member of, and whenever someone asks a question like a newbie, oh, blah 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 blah, it's almost as if part of the group rules is that there's a certain requirement of asshole responses, and these people are just dicks, and I know what they're doing. They're trying to make themselves look like great adepts.
Right.
But you never say anything intelligent, constructive, anything like that. So I know you think that the image you're putting across is exceptionalism, but it's quite the opposite. And the more you talk about, and so the same idea, like the more you talk about how great you are at magic and what an adept you are, how enlightened you are, whatever, like all of those,
You're the Magnus that figured it out.
You're anything but,
Right.
because if you've gotten to that point, the need to let everyone know isn't there.
Right.
Because you don't have to prove anything, because you've done it, you're doing it. And if you're talking about it in those sort of terms, you're trying to prove it to people. And if you're trying to prove it to people, then you're not there.
That's why I think it's so funny when you look at some of the older occultists who are still alive, who perhaps 25 or 30 years ago, when I was first really getting interested in magic, who I might have thought were egotistical or brash. What I think is funny now is some of the older occultists who are still alive, who are actually seem far more powerful and perhaps more genuine, because the inability to even track them down is almost impossible. I mean, they're there and they're watching in the shadows, and they'll comment every now and then, but most of them don't have Facebook, or if they do, they only post like, once a year.
Yeah.
Or they'll have a website, but you got to email them because there's no Twitter account associated with it.
Yeah.
Like that almost makes me think, oh, they have reached kind of a point in their stewardship of magic to where they realize they don't have to pop in on every single tweet that's posted.
Exactly. The people that you want to hear from in the occult community are the people that are not reachable.
Right.
They're the ones that I want on my podcast that don't do podcasts.
Right.
You know? Now, there's a caveat to that, I think.
Yes, there is.
There are genuine adepts who you want to hear from that have also, you know, they're authors, so they have to be public.
Right.
They have to be somewhat accessible. If for nothing else, to promote their next book, which is fine. Like, that's not a criticism, because
right.
You know, we do live in a society where you need to take in money.
Yeah.
So that's not a criticism. But no, by and large, the people that you really want to follow on Twitter don't have Twitter.
Right.
Will never even see a TikTok video, let alone be in a TikTok video. Probably don't know what TikTok is.
Right.
You know? Yeah, they're not the hidden masters, they're the hidden adepts.
Right.
But yeah, and you know, every once in a while they you know, come out of the shadows and they make a comment on Facebook or whatever, and you know, it's like a gem that you desperately grab at and be like, oh yeah, that was good.
Yeah, it's really funny when that'll happen, when someone will reveal themselves, and it'll be like they will just, like, they'll do a podcast, like, out of nowhere. They'll just do a podcast, and it's funny because it goes right back to kind of my original, when I was talking about like the drunk 14-year-old versus the master. Like, you want to hear from them, and then they'll just do like a random podcast, or they'll just do like a random YouTube video, and what they're saying is so simple and something you've heard a million times, but they felt the need to say that again.
Yeah.
And you think to yourself, like, oh, I wanted more. But the thing is like, no, they realized you just needed to hear this again.
Yeah. 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 It's interesting. You know, it's
for all of the deep dives and all of the, like, we have to do this, and what is this line and this working mean, and what do these numbers mean, and if you read this book, it says on the 13th, like, we do all of these deep dives into all of this stuff, and then you adepts, as you called them, and they'll burst forward and say, like, simple thing number one. And you're like, oh, I wanted it to be deeper. Yeah. But no, it's not deeper. It's just simple thing number one.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because especially with, you know, like the Western esoteric tradition, it can be so complex. Layers and layers and layers of meaning and symbolism and correspondence and blah, blah, blah. And it can be hard to wrap your head around. But you know, it's important. And those colors and symbols and whatnot can have profound effects on your life and your development. And so you try, like you said, like, you get the books and the this and the that, and there's just so much information, and yeah, they just pop out of the blue and be like, blah, blah, blah. It's as simple as that. And you're like,
yeah, it doesn't have to be blue.
Yeah.
Both fingers don't have to be up.
Yeah.
And you're like, what? What did I just spend 15 years trying to figure out how to do this?
Yeah. But the thing too with that though is, you know, I believe you can get to a point, you know, like a genuine seeker, a genuine adept can get to a point where all of the layers of correspondence and the complexity falls away. I do believe that all of that hard work is important. And I think everyone on this path should go through that hard work. I like tradition. I like structure. I like rules. So I play very well in the realm of ritual magic, especially, like even like within a tradition, like Golden Dawn's system,
Right.
where they have the rules and the steps and everything is laid out and blah 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 blah. And I like that. It's valuable to me. I have an idea of where it's taking me, as much as I can possibly comprehend, or anyone can comprehend where it's taking you. But at the same time, I've been exploring deep purist Enochian magic, which isn't, it's not structured like the Golden Dawn's Enochian magic. It doesn't have the complexity and the layers. It's very pared down. It's very simple, blah, 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 blah. But even more than that, almost starting from like nothing, like I have this sigil drawn on paper. I'm going to do an Enochian working. What's going to happen? Well, here are the results. Okay, got the colors for the sigil. I'm going to redo the sigil on paper, do a working. But I don't have the ring. I don't have the table of practice. I don't have the this. I don't have the that. Like the whole Enochian setup.
Right.
And great. But now I need the sigil to be bigger on wood, on the floor for me to stand, and there's something to be said about not following the rules, seeing what happens, but knowing that it's going to take you where it's going to take you. And if you're going to experiment that way, and if it's taking you in a direction, go with it, because it's taking you in a direction. Unless it's taking you off a cliff, then feel free to stop.
But I mean, that's what you're talking about too. I mean, in a very basic sense, though. I mean, that's the art of magic, right? Like that idea of knowing the rules before you break them.
Yeah.
Whether it's in painting or dancing or music, like learning the structure.
Yeah.
And then deconstructing it and then rebuilding it, even though you aren't doing it that way anymore.
Yeah.
You know where it was, so you can move it into a new area.
Yeah. But in some regards, rules are arbitrary. I mean, if you don't know what the rules are, you don't know that you're breaking them. And me knowing that I'm breaking the rules informs the actual working, because when I get a really powerful result like this, distributor of my products for China, I can be like, holy shit, that just happened by doing not only deep purist Enochian, but an even more pared down, like no table of practice setup, just one paper sigil. And so if I didn't know the rules, the structures and whatnot, there wouldn't be as much a sense of wonder, which I think is important in the practice of magic. And if I didn't know the rules, and if I didn't have that larger framework behind me, I don't think I would progress with this experimenting with deep purist Enochian, because I wouldn't know the direction to head to. Like, as I've been progressing, the angels have been like, okay, you need to step up your practice and start taking it more seriously with the tools and everything. But I know how to go that way because I already have the structure and the basics behind me. If the angels said that to me, not knowing anything about the tools and the structure and whatnot, I'd be like, what are you talking about?
But when you say, like, when you got that distributor and you didn't have to do any of the actual workings, like it was just a kind of deconstructed Enochian, like,
Well, so the working was
but I mean, here, before you
yeah.
say, like, this, I guess what I'm saying with knowing the rules and breaking them, and I guess what I'm saying is, like, if I tell you 2 plus 2, you know 4. You know 4 without doing the math in your head. You've heard it, you've learned it, it's embedded, it's ingrained in you. And you're not so much as breaking the rules as you are, it's already in your head. The working is in your head.
Mm.
It's a part of you already. And so when you do something and it has that experience, like you said, getting the third distributor, like, even though you didn't go through the practice, it was already, wasn't it already ingrained in your head? You didn't even have to do it.
Yeah. I see what you're saying, and I think I have to agree with you on that point because, like, when I'm talking about like deconstructing like the deep purist stuff, like that's probably not the best word to use. Like not having the whole table of practice set up, because number one, I'm curious to see what deep purist Enochian working is without all the tools, number one. Number two, I'm not convinced, or I wasn't convinced that they were necessary, because it doesn't, in all of these diaries, it never says that you need the table of practice to practice Enochian magic. They needed the table of practice to communicate with the angels to get all of the Enochian material.
Right.
So the last working that I did, Enochian working, the angels were giving a bit of a hard time, and they're like, I get what you're doing, but you need to step it up. You know, it's almost like saying, like, you know what the rules are, you know what you need. You have to put more effort into this. And I knew what they were talking about because, you know, the sigils were getting more elaborate and more, like, quote unquote professional.
Mm-hmm.
Bad word, but, you know,
Right. Yeah.
more proper and more care and craft put into them. And so I'm seeing this progression where they're like, okay, it's cute what your idea of like how bare bones can I go? We showed you. You want to keep going? We need more from you. We need more effort. You need to be more invested in this. Da 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 da. So they may be leading me into a direction where I'm doing full deep purist, like table of practice, everything the way it's laid out in these journals. And then I'll have my answer. I'll know if the angels wanted Dee to have the setup for him to receive the information, or if the setup is necessary for Enochian magic.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So yeah, we'll see. So it may come right back around, you know, learn the rules, break the rules, and just being directed by the angels to go back and start following the rules.
Right.
But that's, I think that's a lot of what magic should be is, I mean, magic should always be fun, but there should be experimentation. Just because it's in a book doesn't mean it's right.
Well,
try.
and when I was saying about math, like you and I both, and the listeners, like that concept of like, 2 times 2 is 4, 4 times 2 is 8. Like we all immediately know your brain isn't doing the actual calculation. You're just saying it because it's so ingrained in you.
Mhm.
But I would tell you, like, maybe 6 months ago, I sat down and I made a times table like I did when I was in third grade. It was so much fun making
Right.
a times table. I mean, I did it. It only took me 10 minutes,
Yeah.
but I did a one and one here and one there, and then that one's one and a one and a two. And I did the whole times table. And my brain was like, oh, this is fun to do.
Yeah.
And I feel like what you were saying, like learn the rules, break the rules, go back and do the rules. And then you were just saying right there, like it should always be fun. Like I think sometimes that you do learn the rules so that you can break the rules, so that you can go back and have fun with the rules.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Because I mean, if you're going through, say, if you join the Golden Dawn and you're going through the Outer Order, now I mean each individual Golden Dawn order is going to be, slightly different with their Outer Order material, but still, it's it's not fun. It's not a fun curriculum. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of
Right.
memorization.
Like
It's
your
not,
original times table.
yeah. It's not necessarily fun. It can be fascinating. It's transformative. It's not necessarily fun. But once you got your rules, your foundation, and you move on, because again, using GD as an example, you go through the Outer Order, and if you get into the Inner Order, you're in Adeptus Minor, so you can consider yourself an adept, you can call yourself an adept, and that's where a lot of the real magic begins. You still have a lot more to learn, but you can start, experimenting, and that's where it becomes a lot of fun.
Yeah. All right. This is my last cigarette.
Okay. So yeah, and I mean even stuff like pentagram rituals and hexagram rituals, and banishing, invoking, lesser, supreme, opening by watchtower, how those are combined. And GD was very like you banish at the beginning,
Right.
banishing pentagrams, at the end, banishing pentagrams, banishing hexagrams, da 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 da. And there's so much, commentary on nowadays, on that. Is that the best procedure? Try this, banishing pentagrams, invoking hexagrams. Don't banish at the end, like there's just, there's even basics, things like that, try experimenting with. You're gonna
Right.
get, if you, do banishing pentagrams, banishing hexagrams, you're gonna get one result. If you do banishing pentagrams, invoking hexagrams, you're going to get another result, and you're going to feel that. And your whatever magical working you do is going to be affected in a different way. And you're going to know that. So try it. See what happens. Experiment. Have fun.
Do you think that I mean, it seems like, at least to me from the outside, it seems like that idea of experimentation is growing with a small number of people, but there's still a larger portion that believes it's been perfected.
Oh yeah, I mean, now if you're a member of a Golden Dawn temple, you're going to be doing the Golden Dawn system,
Right.
you know, in the temple with the group, blah 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 blah. What you do on your own, you know, knock yourself out, really. There is a contingent of everything was figured out and done and perfected by 1900.
Right.
Doing, you know, the lesser invoking ritual of the pentagram with colored elemental pentacles is not something that the original Golden Dawn did. As a ritual, it makes sense to do, but there are some people that are like, nope, they didn't do it in the original, so it's not valid. It's, you know, and that makes no sense to me because number one, the Golden Dawn didn't exist for that 12 years, 1888 to 1900. It schismed. It kept going. Right. And I mean, it kept going, you know, there was a line of succession, you know, in New Zealand up until like 79. So the Golden Dawn didn't stop at 1900. And even if they didn't schism, let's say that never happened, Golden Dawn stayed the original Golden Dawn.
Yeah,
well, it would probably be a corporation now or whatever. Right. There was never a schism. It's the same organization. It's been 140 years since they first formed. I'm sure at some point someone would have done a lesser invoking ritual of the pentagram with colored elemental pentagrams.
Right.
Because it's such a basic, common sense ritual to do. So the idea that nothing new can be incorporated, you know, it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that I sometimes see online that really is almost a concern to me, which is when people argue against any kind of deviation or experimentation.
I think that
because we're obviously, because of what I said at the very beginning, like obviously because for me magic has a whole side of nonsense to it.
Yeah.
That desires creativity, and it desires, and we see it from what we've talked about, it desires showmanship. It wants to see what you can do. What can you do with me?
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes I get bummed out when I see people saying like, this isn't a game. There's no room for nonsense. There's no room for experimentation or creativity.
Yeah. But you know what? I don't experiment in a game. I'm not creative in a game. A game has very specific rules.
Okay, but I mean, so I'm lacking language.
No, because that's what they always say. This isn't a game. No, it isn't a game. Because I don't experiment in the middle of a game. I'm not creative in the middle of a game.
Okay, so what I'm saying though, again, lacking language, proper language. When I say, so I think that the way that my internal dialogue is I call the universe is to me a game. And when I say game, you, like you said, you don't experiment within a game because there's rules. When my internal dialogue of a game is playing, when I was little and I was told to go outside and play, there were no rules. I just went outside and had fun. There was no expectation of winning or losing.
Right.
The games that I played were made up on the spot, and they were solely for the purpose of joy and fun. And so when I say like game, that's what I mean, play without winning and losing. I think what the universe wants us to do, personally, at this point in my journey, I think the universe wants us to do that. It wants us to play in a creative way and to make our rules and test our rules and then break our rules and expand and create without winning or losing.
Right. Yep. Gotcha. And I know, and I 100% agree. And the hardliners are the minority voice. But the thing is that, and we know this with social media, the minority voices tend to be the loudest.
That is true.
Attention. You know what I mean? So yeah, no, they're in the minority. It's just we're too busy doing the work,
doing stuff. Yeah,
about work. You know what I mean? And you know, with the Twitter wars and the blah 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 blah. I never know what's going on because I'm too busy doing the work. You can talk about the work, you can fight about the work all day on Twitter. I'm doing the work.
Right.
So you can be up on your soapbox. Oh, you can't change a thing. There's rules. There's rules. I'm, you know,
actually doing something.
I'm working. I'm, you know, discovering things, and
it does amaze me. It does amaze me to a certain degree of how much work and craft and magic someone can be doing if they're posting 52 times a day on Twitter, 13 times on Facebook, 14 TikToks, and a YouTube video. Like, how much magic are you doing during the day? Like, if I take out your sleeping and your social media, you've got maybe an hour to eat and do all this magic you're talking about.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's true. If I can do my full daily practice, that's about 3 hours a day of magic ritual. And then, you know, like my business, I make candles and incense and oils. So that's an act of magic right there as well.
Sure.
I don't include that when I talk about my daily practice because like that's still work. And yes, it's doing something for me. I think any act of magic is doing something for you, but I don't consider that my daily practice. But still, I mean, I can, in theory, be in a magical space in my ritual room easily 12 hours a day doing magic.
Mm-hmm.
So no, I'm not, you know, I'm spending a lot of time on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram fighting about it. So yeah,
I guess that's why I like you.
Yeah, you know.
All right, I'm all done.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so before you go, let the listeners know about whatever you have going on website, your social media, all that. Like, I'll add this all to the show notes, but just let them know.
My website is weirdlectures.com. All of my social media is John E.L. Tenney. And if you want to know anything more about me, you can go on Google and you can type John Tenney Weirdo and then follow it wherever it leads you.
Don't you have a podcast? Didn't you start something recently with...
Yeah, I have a podcast with my friend Jessica called What's Up Weirdo.
Jessica, right.
And it's just the two of us talking on the phone once a week.
Okay, perfect. And that you can get wherever.
Yeah, Apple, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, all that stuff. It has nothing to do with the paranormal. It started because of quarantine. And everybody was doing podcasts and everybody sounded so good and everybody had all these microphones. And I said, you know, the part of podcast that people like the reason this podcast, I like this podcast is because it's just two people talking to each other. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what people really like. I mean, there is a place for movie reviews and rewatch reviews for television shows, but I think people like banter more than anything else. And so I told Jessica, people aren't getting their banter anymore that they would get at the bar or sitting around a friend's house. So let's just tape record our phone call once a week with each other and post it as a, and she was like, but it sounds like crap. I said, people are used to it.
Yeah.
Phones drop out. Like people are used to it.
I really took a dislike to overly produced podcasts.
Me too.
I finally relented and added like an intro and an outro with some music. But like there's no editing here. It's just like I won't even listen to 1 second of this podcast. Once I hit stop, it's going to generate the file and I upload the file. Like I won't listen to it because I don't want to hear my voice.
It's the same thing with What's Up Weirdo. It's the same thing we do. Once we record it, we don't ever listen to it ever again.
Yeah. There's no editing. I'm having a conversation and with amazing people, and because we don't have it anymore, you know. And these overly produced podcasts aren't they're just not hitting the spot.
Right.
So that's how this podcast was born.
My first well, not my first, but the podcast I did, Realm of the Weird, which was my paranormal podcast. I did 11 episodes of it. It's very produced. It's edited, you know, background music, and I use tape recordings and stuff from real client interviews. And I did 11 episodes of it. I think the last episode came out 10 years ago. And I was like, I never want to do that ever again.
Yeah.
And then everybody's podcast sounded like that. And I was like, I'm glad that I'm not doing that anymore.
Yeah. No, just give it to me raw. I was just gonna say give it to me raw and uncut, but yeah.
Well, thanks for having me on.
Thanks for coming on. This was so great. And, you know, you rescued me. So I have a episode to drop on Monday. So that's fantastic. So I really appreciate it. And like I said, all of your links I'll put into the show notes. So everyone that's listening, you can go follow John on social media and go to his website and listen to his podcast. And my link's going to be on there too. That link gets you to my YouTube channel, all my social media, my online store, because you're going to want to shop till you drop on my website, because I'm amazing. So obviously the products that I make are amazing. And yeah, so good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Lux Files. You'll find all the guest links in the show notes, as well as the link www.lailokensAwen.com/links. That link will get you to my page of links, where you can then go to my Lailokens Awen website, the Lux Files page, and my Lailokens Awen YouTube channel that has all the Lux Files videos. It also has all my social media links there, so you can follow me and the Lux Files. And don't forget to subscribe to the Lux Files wherever you get your podcasts. And lastly, if you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving me a review. Until next time.